This is the August 14th study session of the Littleton City Council. We have All members of council present except for council member Albies. So our first item on the agenda is the Littleton Housing Study Phase 2 recommendations. And I'll let Mark introduce this.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Just a little background. I realize we've got 4 council members specifically who don't really have the history of our housing study. This is a project that started approximately 4 years ago when the council at that time decided they wanted to gain a little bit more understanding about our housing situation here in our community. So last summer, the BBC Research and Consulting, and I'll make a better introduction of Molly here in a second, but they came and presented here basically the data that they had collected and some of the results and shared that with City Council. So after that, it was agreed that we need to look at some implementation strategies. And so here this evening, the committee that had been formed here over the last several years kind of finished some of that work. And this evening here, Molly Fitzpatrick with BBC Research and Consulting is going to be presenting the results of that. And specifically, staff is recommending that if council finds this acceptable, that you direct staff here to incorporate this into the next step of the process, which is our comprehensive plan process, for which a housing would be specifically an element of our comp plan. And we can talk a little bit more about that in detail as we get into this discussion. So with that, Molly, I'm going to, looks like we have a question here first.
Yeah, so clarify for me, and it's quite possible my memory was not right on this. I thought the committee was asked to be recommending properties that we might buy for use for something like this. Maybe a little more specificity in the request, but remember that. Maybe
I don't recall that as being I don't recall that as being the scope of the committee. I recall that we wanted to get an idea of housing needs, uses, demand, future look, kind of what's a short-term, mid-term, long-term picture as best we can with the study that we have.
it's fairly comprehensive.
Yeah, as comprehensive as it can be given the time. And one of the things too, as Mark indicated, this is actually gone on a lot longer than it should have. It was originally a council mandate for a different council, and then kind of carried through and frankly puttered along for a bit. And then I think that there was, kind of the tenor on council that there was not a lot of interest in continuing this. And then when we have a new council on board, this is something that we have been sitting through a number of P4s where we're looking at different proposed developments. We also have issues where we've got a lot of the homeless issues are starting we're talking about those and other things. And so it has kind of risen back up to what we deem as a level of importance again, because truly housing is one of the pillars of your community. So we are going to be looking at making a lot of decisions based on housing. And so I think this council then decided, let's get this thing rolling again. We sent go-getter-done Jerry in to get things fired up again, and I think the committee jumped right in. They've been eager to continue to work. So I also want to, we've got a couple of members of the committee, if we can introduce. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I'm Stu Maher. I serve on the Housing Authority Board, the South Metro Housing Options Board, and did serve on this committee as well.
I'm Corey Ritz. I'm the Executive Director of South Metro Housing Options.
Yvonne Anaya, Director of Real Estate, South Metro Housing Options.
Thank you for being here. Okay.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly Fitzpatrick and have her make a presentation, and we can come back to discuss this in more detail.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mark, and Mayor as well. And thank you, council members, for having us here, or having me here again. I think we've had a pretty good intro in terms of background and that sort of thing. My goal today is not to go back and sort of fully rehash all of the data analysis that we did a year ago, but you do have access to a presentation that we made a year ago and the full draft report that has all of those findings. But today I really hope just to kind of give you a quick background, which I think has been pretty well covered already, recap just the top needs that we identified out of the data analysis as well as the community engagement that was part of the first phase of this study. And then I'm going to spend most of the time, which is, it should be pretty quick, leaving some time for questions as well, just walking through the recommendations that came out of this study that, as part of a collaborative effort between BBC, the consultant, as well as the Housing Advisory Committee. So as quick background, which I think Mark really covered well, was just in early 2017, BBC Research and Consulting was contracted to conduct this housing study. We are a local policy research firm, an economic research firm. We're based in Denver. We're a pretty small boutique firm, and we do a lot of housing-oriented consulting, policy-oriented consulting, and looking at markets and understanding those. And so we do a lot of work in the metro, but also really across the Rocky Mountain West. That's who we are. I've been with BBC for about 7 years, and I'm a director there, and I help co-manage our housing and community development practice area. So we were contracted in 2017 to do this housing study. In June of 2017, we actually wrapped up completing a draft of phase one, which was really just the presentation and including a presentation of those findings to City Council. That phase one really focused on the data analysis, the community engagement, which was pretty extensive for this study as well, so that we could really understand not just what are the data telling us, but what are the people in your community saying about what they want out of Littleton, what their concerns are related to housing, related to development issues. And then in spring of 2018, we came back together with the same committee that had been part of advising that study process to really craft recommendations out of the findings. And so really taking all of the engagement and the data and the market study that we did, understanding what the top needs were that were identified through that, and then really looking at what are some actions that we can take, what are steps that we can take to help move this forward and help address some of these needs. And so today is kind of full circle the presentation of those recommendation findings. So as a quick recap on top needs, these are straight out of the original market study, so you can look at additional detail and supporting documentation in the original draft. But the top needs that we identified, I stand up and point at things, so I'll do that a little bit. So we really identified 3 core needs that came out of both the market analysis as well as the community engagement, and those were additional affordable rentals. And that affordable right there, that's lowercase affordable. That means things that might have some subsidy attached, but also might just be market rate affordable. So this is looking strictly at a price point. And saying specifically for residents that are earning less than $25,000 per year. So the city currently has a shortage of about 1,300 units, 1,350, that are priced below $623 a month. And that's really right in that range where people, even that are working full-time but may have minimum wage jobs, are not able to afford a rental unit in Littleton. And that shortage is based on comparing your existing residents and their incomes with your existing offerings in terms of what's available in the rental market. The second need we identified was starter homes and family homes, priced near or below $300,000. So once you get above that $300,000 mark, there starts to be a lot more inventory, a little bit more accessibility. Below that mark, it's really hard to find something. And based on our calculations, that $300,000 home is affordable to a household that you have to be earning at least $73,000 a year basically to afford a $300,000 home. As interest rates have continued to rise since we conducted this study, that's probably up a little bit higher, maybe closer to 80 at this point, and will continue to bump up as interest rates look like they're going to continue to go up. It makes it harder and harder even for that income to buy it at $300,000. And third is housing options attractive to seniors, and that primarily is low maintenance housing options, so smaller yard, potentially no yard, potentially, as well as few or no stairs in the unit. So that could be a wide range of different types of units. The focus here is really on the amenity of that unit and whether or not it has stairs, so offers ability for accessibility and limited mobility options as well. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so seniors, we've been told that the government identifies senior as over 55. Are you using that same definition for seniors?
Yes and no. So when we look at senior, in the data analysis, we typically call seniors anyone that's 65 or older, so we impose a little bit more of a restrictive definition on that. However, when we look at survey findings, and we had some focus groups that talked about this as well, we used sort of a more generic aging population and senior definition. So in some places we're strictly identifying in the data as 65 and older. In other places where we're generally talking about preferences, we're looking at, we're just asking, we asked realtors and service providers, what do you think seniors need? What do you think your aging population needs? So in some cases it's a little more flexible, and in some cases we use a slightly higher age bracket there.
So do any of your conclusions regarding that age category, are you defining housing for them as independent housing or as any sort of assisted and group living?
Right, great question. So when we were talking, we did a little bit of both, and you'll see some of this in the survey. So one of the questions I think that is really telling in the survey about senior preferences is whether or not you think you might move in the future, and why you might move, and what kind of housing you might be looking for. And so in that question, we actually asked seniors, look, do you want to move, or do you want to stay in your house as long as possible? If you want to move, what are you looking for? And some of the responses there will give you kind of that spectrum of preference, and that includes, I want to live in a senior-only community, I want to live in some type of group living situation, but that might just be with roommates in a single-family home, or I want to live in, sort of typical market rate housing. And so when we're talking about this need right here, we're talking a lot more about the form of that housing structure, and not necessarily the target market in terms of senior communities. So this doesn't mean you need age-restricted senior communities. This means you need to have housing options that don't have stairs. And so that might mean a condo development that's senior only. It might also mean patio homes that are not restricted to any type of unit. It might also mean a ranch-style house. So it can really mean a wide variety of things, and we're not even attaching to this a specific affordability threshold. We're saying you need more stock that really allows for this. And Littleton actually has a good bit of older housing stock, and a lot of that is two-story and has large lots. And we heard from both seniors and from realtors that said, look, I want something smaller, but it doesn't exist, and I'm not willing to leave Littleton, and so I'm going to stay in my large lot or large single-family home because I can't really find exactly what I want, but I'm not willing to leave Littleton because I love the community, I love the culture. And so this is really getting at that, which not only will provide options for those seniors that are looking to downsize or move into a more mobility-friendly option, but then this also will create inventory in your other single-family homes that might end up closer to this category, right? And give you some starter homes, or give you a next step for some of those starter homes to move. So it not only provides for this, but it also helps loosen up inventory across the board. Great, thanks, good question. And I also want to clarify, I know that especially these first two are pretty affordability oriented, but I do want to emphasize that the study is really a housing study as a whole. These are just the needs that came out of that finding. And so we didn't start off the study saying, all right, we need to find out what your affordability needs are. We started off the study saying, what does housing look like in Littleton? How does that match up with what people want and what people can afford? And this is where we really identified the needs out of that broad look at your market. So as a quick recap, and this language is also in both the recommendations document and the original document, but just kind of a reminder of why we look at this and why how a lot of communities think about housing. There's a large trend in local government in particular to start thinking about housing in the same way that we think about infrastructure from a municipal perspective, and that it's something that is an asset for your community. It can be a community benefit as well in terms of housing. And one of the reasons that that's the case is that when you have this balance of housing stock, and that means kind of a spectrum of types and affordability levels in your housing, it really allows for a diverse resident population, which supports your local economy. It gives workers places to live at all different levels, service providers, and it contributes to the culture and the community identity. And Littleton, when we looked kind of at the historical trend in terms of price and market options, Littleton has really been relatively affordable to households across an income spectrum. But that is starting to change. And so we're seeing that as prices have increased, many people, many labor industries even that could once afford to live in Littleton are struggling to make that now. So any adjustments that you make, actions that you take to mitigate price increases or really even preserve what you have currently will help preserve the culture and identity of Littleton itself. So housing is not just about market intervention or who can live where, but it really helps drive and or protect the community identity. And so that's the way that we think about housing and that we're seeing more and more communities start to think about that. So with that intro, I just want to walk through the recommendations. There's a little bit more detail, obviously, in the report itself. But I will just kind of do the quick overview of each one, and then happy to take questions either as we go or at the end, either one. So the first recommendation is to adopt and articulate a vision for housing. So pretty straightforward. What do you want? What do you as a community want, as a council want out of your housing? And a lot of this will happen through the comprehensive planning process, which is a very vision-oriented document. But really, what that does is it helps signal the city's housing goals both to developers, but also to the community itself. The 1 and 2 year action steps that came out of the committee that worked on these was to formalize that housing strategic planning through the creation of a task force or committee to study and spearhead those housing policies. So the committee that's been in place right now was originally created really to advise the study itself. And so the recommendation here is to move that forward and say, let's have a committee that continues to look at this going forward. The second recommendation is rental-oriented, so addressing that rental gap need that we talked about, and that is setting a goal to mitigate increases to the rental gap. It's probably unrealistic to say, nope, we don't want any rental gap at all. There will never be a mismatch in incomes and housing. But at least paying attention to where that gap is and trying to have some efforts that will help mitigate that increase, keep it at sort of a manageable level, preserve where it is now.
On this, how do we compare to the region? Is everyone kind of at the same rate of gap or percentage, or are we better, worse? Because it's you can put this on any region, any city.
Yeah.
The numbers may change, but it's the same story. So can you just give us perspective?
Sure, and I haven't done a gaps analysis for every community, but by and large, your price point in terms of metro communities is about in the middle. And so you have a pretty good proportion of middle-class residents. You also have a decent size relative to some of the other communities around of that middle-class housing. There's a gap everywhere, I can tell you that without actually calculating it. I don't know exactly how you stack up in terms of what that ratio is. But there's a little bit more detail in the actual data report around where your prices match.
Is that something that you can find out for us, just to give us perspective of, are we ahead of the game or behind? Yeah, and
I could pretty easily pull together. There's several other communities that we have done market studies for recently in the metro that I could pull and circulate to each of you as well. Great. So the city currently has that shortage that we talked about before. That rental gap has more than doubled between 2000 and today. And so looking at that gap is getting a little bit wider between who can afford it and what you have to offer. And we also projected that over the next 15 years, that without any sort of interventions, that's likely to increase up to 1,700 units. So the first 1 and 2 year action steps are to improve the perception of low-income housing tax credit housing. LIHTC is what that's called for short. It is the primary mechanism by which affordable housing is developed throughout the country. It is basically developers build housing, they get a tax credit for making it affordable to certain income populations, then they sell that tax credit to a corporation that needs a tax credit so that they don't pay taxes. It's very different than kind of the public housing of old. It looks different. They tend to look exactly like market rate units. Colorado has a really strong program in terms of LIHTC development. But there's always a perception of, oh, you're putting LIHTC or you're putting in affordable housing, I don't want the projects and those sorts of things. So really just working to improve that perception and improve communication around what that does for people's property values, which in most cases actually bumps up property values because it's nice new construction. And it was, along with that, zoning incentives for affordable development, so that can be fee waivers, that can be fast-track processing, those types of things to encourage affordable rental development. And then a little bit further out on the action steps, the 3 to 5 year would be explore the rental rehab program. So that's there's more detail on that as well, but just offering incentives to rehab multifamily properties. Evaluate the potential for city-owned and nonprofit land donations, so the city could, that has land, donate it to nonprofit developers or partner with them in certain ways. Land banking and land trust, again, that's looking for land, as well as using land trust models, which we'll talk more about, also comes up under the ownership options. And then consider purchasing aging multifamily. So when the market is not going to be able to maintain or continue that multifamily, to purchase it, and then partner with nonprofits to maintain affordability there.
Is that something that you see happening at a kind of a recessionary period? Is that this last one?
On this one, consider purchasing. Yeah, we see it oftentimes in recession periods. So if a local government has capital during recession or during slight softening in the market, that's absolutely the time to sort of snatch those up. I think we've definitely been in a development boom in terms of multifamily in the last 3 to 5 years in the metro, and so it's likely that we'll start to see that market soften a little bit, and so we may see some of those start to come available.
You see a trend with municipalities buying residential and getting into that sort of owning a residential property, or moving away towards
Sure.
owning
I would say most of the time we see cities intervene and say, we're going to make this purchase, and then sell immediately to somebody else to operate. So we don't see a lot of cities that are actually managing those properties or owning them long term, but cities are often providing sort of the gap financing to say, let's buy this, and then let's work with South Metro Housing Options, or on the ownership side, Habitat for Humanity, and doing sort of nonprofit partnerships to actually manage and maintain the land going forward.
So when the aging multifamily, are you talking about maintaining it, or redeveloping it in some way, or adding to it to keep it affordable? Or how is that?
Any of those are an option, so it totally depends on the property itself. So when we say aging multifamily, we're mostly saying multifamily units that come for sale that probably need some rehab or are currently providing your market rate affordability. And so this is the class 3, class C apartment units that are really providing a lot of that market rate affordability for people. When those go for sale, that's what we're talking about. So on the ownership side, our third recommendation is to consider implementing policies and programs to improve ownership affordability and accessibility. So that includes preserving your existing affordable ownership opportunities, but also creating opportunity for missing middle and accessible development. When we say missing middle, it's sort of a plannery term, basically, that's getting a lot of buzz right now. But it basically just means attached products that look like single family, or that integrate well into single family neighborhoods. So we're not talking giant apartment buildings, we're talking duplexes, quadplexes, sort of small clusters of apartments, but sometimes even designed to look exactly like a single family house. So well integrated attached products is what we mean when we say that. Those often have additional affordability because you get more units on one lot, and the construction costs, there's some economies of scale. So the 1 and 2 year action steps here are really just to look at what the resources are. What do we have right now? What programs do we have right now? Are those working well? What partnerships are out there? What resources do we have? And then also, what resources do we maybe not have that might be out there in terms of either state level resources or other grants or federal programs or anything else that might be available that the city could use. So that's the short term action. A longer term action in the 3 to 5 year are to continue the home rehab programs, looking to evaluate a revolving loan fund for home improvements for homeowners so that they can stay in their homes, as well as looking at additional product diversity that really speaks to this missing middle type of product. And then development incentives and fee waivers for accessible units. So we talked about in the last slide, development incentives for affordable rentals. This is where we're talking about sort of accessibility and making sure that that there are enough units for people with disabilities, as well as for seniors who are more likely to have some type of mobility disability. The fourth recommendation is to inventory vacant and underutilized parcels for residential development potential. So looking at all the parcels that you have currently in the city and evaluating if those could be redeveloped, and if so, what does that look like? Would that be sort of mixed income housing? Would it be mixed use? But really taking stock. So the 1 and 2 year action steps: assemble that list of underutilized parcels, assess the potential for mixed income housing, and as part of that, being proactive about how we're going to make that easy. So do we need to change the zoning? Do we need to look at that? And then really developing a vision parcel by parcel for that redevelopment. This will largely be accomplished through that comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan does a comprehensive job at looking at all of your parcels and evaluating those. But this would be a pretty focused effort that kind of takes that comprehensive plan and is proactive in saying, let's sort of tee that up for the kind of development that we want it to be. And then fifth and last is increase the capacity for affordable preservation and development through financial resources. So this is the money one. It's the scary one typically. But basically, a lot of those other interventions that we've talked about, those other recommendations, you can largely do through process and program. A lot of things you can accomplish without having to spend much money. But certainly some things cost more money if you're going to start to acquire multifamily properties or those types of things. Those efforts would really benefit from a funding source that is revolving and that is dependable. And so here we're not necessarily saying that these are the things you need to implement, but we just wanted to throw a few of the options in terms of mechanisms that other communities are using to set this structure up. And those include mill levies and bonds, employer-provided housing. We see that primarily in like Silicon Valley as well as mountain communities, but there are different programs that do that locally as well. Linking it to commercial development, so if you come in and build a big business, we know you're going to attract employees and you need to help cover the cost of housing for that. So there's linkage fees. Boulder uses one, Denver uses one as well. And then community benefits ordinance, which basically says if you're going to come in and do development or you make a deal with the city where you get kind of an extra density or you get this or that, then exchanging that for something that's provided as part of that development that would provide community benefit. And you can make that housing related. You could also make it related to other services like childcare or community space and those types of things. So those are a lot of the mechanisms we're seeing implemented, but they are just here for consideration. And we acknowledge that that's probably a longer term view of really looking through those. We've listed it as 5 or more years out.
Question. In the recommendations above, previous.
Sure.
I'm thinking, I'm not remember saying, if somebody already has a multifamily unit, I mean, there is a development. None of the seniors who would like to relocate want to go there because they're not in very good condition. Or they're not even very safe. I don't think we mentioned that as a possibility for rehab, for making money available for rehab.
To rehab.
Yeah, you remember we did something like that, I think, in the northeast neighborhood near Delaware and 1 street or 2 north of Wilton Boulevard. Because when we did it, there were light fixtures hanging down in the hall and racks. And do you remember that at all?
So we do have, let's see, not on this one exactly, but so in the previous couple where we're talking about rental and ownership preservation, we do have home rehab programs, and that's the ownership oriented, but also rehab programs for rental properties. And so we've got a recommendation in there that does talk about using public dollars or public efforts to rehab.
Because, if we've got places that we can really, I'm not saying don't do other, but if
Sure.
we've got places that we can make safer and attractive.
Yep, absolutely. Using your existing resources and understanding where those potential opportunities lie is absolutely, definitely critical.
A couple of things. We have in downtown Littleton a new development that's coming up that is like tech, or there's some form of financial component to it. Was that included in your statistics? Or, for example, the gap of 1,300, was that included in there, or do you know?
That one was probably not. So when we did our statistics, we were looking at things that were already occupied and residents that were already living in Littleton. So that one is probably not
I
included.
think that's about 110 units.
Talking about Nevada?
Yeah,
What are you talking about?
that's what she's talking about.
Nevada Place. Yep. Now I lost my train of thought. Let me think for a second. You'll have to come back to me.
Okay, sure.
You know, it seems like we've been talking a lot about the seniors, which obviously is very important, but, you know, for me, it's also about the younger generation. You know, my kids, for example, trying to keep them in Littleton if possible, and that affordability piece too. How much of your surveys was directed to the
Yeah, great
home of
question.
millennials, I guess?
Yeah, so the survey that we did conduct was statistically representative of the Littleton population. We did a random digital telephone survey. A lot of the results we present in sort of 3 demographic chunks, and we look at a lot of the data by millennial, which is anybody sort of 18 to 35. And I think we primarily looked at, I might be, don't quote me on this, but I think we looked primarily at 22 to 35 when we're looking at those housing decisions. So we present millennial data, the general market, so sort of Littleton as a whole, as well as senior populations. And the interesting sort of market factors that go into that is that millennials or people that are just forming households tend to want really similar things in a lot of ways as our senior population, because they're looking at typically more affordable properties. They're looking at walkable neighborhoods. So there's a lot of that kind of urban light kind of development where you feel like, oh, I've kind of like, sort of like downtown Littleton really has become. Like, I want to live somewhere where I feel like I can walk some places, but I don't feel like I'm in, you know, Manhattan and those sorts of things. So honestly, there's quite a bit of crossover, but absolutely there's survey data that are presented for both millennials as well as seniors. Yeah, great.
I think in a previous presentation that the data was still preliminary, but I do remember you stating that when you looked at Littleton, it had the right mix. Like it had, you know, enough of, you know, a single family home, enough of apartments. So the mix was balanced, I think was the statement that you used. But then you went on to say, but maybe the condition's not there yet. Maybe they're old or, you know, need updating. So is that statement still true that the mix of the housing types is probably well balanced? They just may need updating or...
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when we looked at sort of the housing stock and what you have, absolutely, you had a better mix of unit types than a lot of communities that we see, especially for inner ring suburbs and more traditional suburbs, which tend to be, in most cases, really single family heavy, whereas Littleton really does have a pretty good mix. But I think our recommendations are not necessarily just condition, but making sure that that mix is not just single family and then large multifamily structures on corridors, but really sort of integrating that mix in a neighborhood that feels cohesive. And so using some of that sort of middle market type product that says, look, even in our single family neighborhood, oh, there's a unit that's actually got 4, but I didn't really notice that it had 4 units or 2. And so kind of mixing that a little bit more within neighborhoods. But absolutely, like Littleton has a great starting mix, and some of that is older stock, so some of it probably has condition issues. I don't think I would emphasize that. I would just say maintain that mix and make sure that you're allowing in your new development that you're not restricting that mix. So often we'll see communities where they had sort of looser zoning regulations in the early days of development, and that allowed for a little bit more mix. But then as communities age, they often kind of tighten up and say, we only want this.
As you can expect, what we're seeing is there's a lot of development that is coming to the community that is your multifamily, your apartments, etc. And one of the things we need to be conscious of is maintaining that balance. So fine, if we do have a new apartment building, we also need to recognize we need to find some solutions for middle market that are some single family so that we don't go off balance.
Go off balance one way or the other, yeah. And looking at that through the comprehensive plan and zoning to understand, have we imposed a structure intentionally or unintentionally that's only allowing us to create certain types of housing? Or have we created a structure that allows the market to provide for what people want? And so really understanding sort of the zoning regulations and the incentives that might be intentional or unintentional as part of that process is really an important component, because the reality is that in any community, the private market is providing most of the housing, but are you letting the private market provide what you really want? Or are you incentivizing the private market to provide what you really want or not? And those types of questions, a lot of which Jocelyn will have answers for, I'm sure, in the very near future.
Kyle?
Let's see if I can remember everything here. To piggyback off of that, kind of what you said with that mix reminds me of a good example that obviously doesn't fit for Littleton, but is Stapleton. How you have, $200,000 condos next to single-family homes next to $1 million homes, and it's all been, it fits right there. So that idea that to have a diverse stock of options, the numbers, looking at the charts, you can see that there's that desire from all age groups and all income levels just to have that option. I think that there's a myth being perpetuated that Littleton is only and should only be single-family residential homes on quarter to half-acre lots. And I think that we need to, step back and realize, hey, there's a demand and a need for this mix here. Two things that struck me. One was looking at the growth of the region. Littleton is growing a lot slower than everything else in the region. So does that create any tension with the community when you get people, all around us that the cities are growing a little faster and Littleton is either, I don't want to say falling behind's not the right answer, but kind of stuck. And then the other thing would be with this study, most of the numbers in there were 2015, 2016. And I realize, stock is stock, it's a number, we're missing something. Is the urgency or immediacy of some of these recommendations not as high as maybe as it should be? Because, the housing market is vastly different than it was in 2016. And it's just accelerated beyond what, anyone outside of Manhattan or San Francisco would expect. And so I don't know if there's a little more, these are good ideas, but maybe we should do a little bit more.
Yeah, great question. So to take your first question in terms of growth rates and comparing that to surrounding communities, the difference in growth rates is largely driven by how much land you're either annexing or not annexing, and how much capacity you have. Littleton is landlocked, and so its growth rate has more to do with its boundaries haven't moved as much as some other areas or as much as unincorporated county areas. So other than
development, not just boundaries, Denver hasn't changed its boundaries all that much.
Sure, and Denver has added a ton of density, particularly in kind of Lodo, Ballpark, Rhino. So you've got some really tight, specific spaces where Denver has added a lot. And if you look at, obviously the addition of Stapleton, which has a bunch of housing units on what used to be an airport. So Denver had kind of an awkward amount of developable land in that sense, and added density. And so I wouldn't say that that's causing tension necessarily, other than the broader growth of the metro is absolutely causing tension in most communities. It's increasing traffic, it's increasing prices, it's increasing people's panic and frustration in a lot of ways as well. So you're very much impacted by that, but I wouldn't say that you're impacted because your rate of growth is different than surrounding communities. You're impacted because the metro is growing. So that would be my answer to your first question. And your second question, which I'm forgetting all of a sudden, is...
Just with the numbers.
Oh, with the dated numbers, yeah. So obviously we did this study a year ago, and there's always a lag, particularly for demographic data. So we get most of that from Census Products, which is an annual survey, the American Community Survey. The most recent ACS data, so for demographics that's out currently, is actually the 2016 data. So even if we updated it right now, there wouldn't be that much more data, but absolutely the market conditions have basically just gotten more expensive and incomes have continued. The general issue right now is that incomes are not rising as fast as market prices, right? That is exacerbated probably as much as it could in the last year since we've done this. So absolutely there's probably more urgency. Affordability has declined more, both in the rental market as well as the ownership market. The ownership market, particularly because interest rates are changing. And that has a huge impact on what people can afford with the income that they have. And so, yes, absolutely, there would be more urgency, or these issues that we see are probably even more pronounced if we took a look at it today than when we took a look at it a year ago.
Yeah, that interest rate comment, even there was, to figure out where it was in the study, it was talking about, low interest rates. Well, that's not even a current reality. Interest rates are going up. So, yes, there's still generally low, but
Lower
not.
than the 90s, but that's
A lot. There was just a stat brought up that the mortgage failure default, it's up to 11% in Denver now, and they've seen it's climbing a little faster than they would have liked. And part of that is obviously these houses got priced way beyond what they probably are really worth. So there's that turmoil there. There's also the issue of our construction defects.
Right.
And developers don't want to do anything but apartments. And then there's this issue of apartment demand, which is at its highest level, hence the prices for apartments are going up. So when you say, that we want to, I like actions that mitigate price increase and preserve both market rate. What are those? What is that secret sauce? That's the magic answer, right?
right. And there's not a magic
Give us
bullet,
that
right? That's why
answer.
there's that many recommendations and that many action steps under. It sounds like we only have 5 recommendations, but there's a lot of actions and a lot of options under each one, and that's because there's not a secret sauce, or we haven't found it certainly. And we do a lot of work that looks at what policies are having an impact in which communities, and even looking at that, it's really community specific and it's really resource specific, and so a lot of this is looking at what can we do, not just what is going to make the biggest difference, but what can we actually start doing now, and what can we plan to do later, and how do we start to approach that, and how do we support what our community has said they want for the vision of Littleton, and how can we take steps that at least move toward that and help prepare us for the future in a way that's better.
Okay, Karina.
So the need and want, how much of this is based on statistics and data that is needed based on demographics, etc., versus what you heard from the community that it is a want? So we may need it, but we may not want it.
Right, sure. And I would say it's a mix of both. It's hard to say exactly what came from what. I would say the top 3 needs that we identified, we see in both of those. So we see that both in the data as well as in the expressed desire of the community. And so I think there's quite a bit of data, there's quite a bit of analysis in terms of looking at markets, looking at prices, looking at incomes, looking at even industries and what your workforce is earning and how that relates to what the housing market is providing. So there's a whole lot of data that really speak to those thresholds in terms of the rental affordability and the ownership affordability price points. That was also affirmed as part of the public outreach, so both from realtors and sort of special interest groups as well as from the population at large. I would say one factor that is not something we can pick up in the data but came across very strongly in the community engagement was we want Littleton to be inclusive. We asked, here's a whole bunch of housing types. What do you think is most important for Littleton to have? And so many of those responses came back. We want to make sure that our teachers can live here. We want to make sure that our public servants can live here. We want to make sure that our service industry workers can live here. That our librarians live here. So a lot of expressed desire for inclusivity and affordability in terms of being a community where all the people that work in this community and that serve this community can also be part of it by living here. And so I think, to me, that is a really, really strong statement and something that certainly influences this in the sense that, look, the community wants these things and the data are saying that you need them. And so it's a little bit of a balancing act to that point, but hopefully I think you'll see support for each of those needs as well as for these types of recommendations, both in the data analysis as well as the community engagement in the full report.
Okay, Council, the ask from staff is that we move this forward into being integrated into the comp plan work that we're doing. Mark, process question, does that require an official action, a resolution, or if there's not a objection to that this evening, is that something then you would just take this and integrate it? It's quite a bit of survey work done from citizens regarding this, so I think not having it duplicated with the comp plan is an efficient use of our resources. Question to you then.
Yeah, if I may just comment on that. I think if there's generally consensus here with all of council to kind of move this into the comp plan, I do not need a formal action by the council. I think if there was some debate about some of the merits of that, then we may have to pause a little bit and talk more detail about it. But the reason why, to me, that it's important here for the city to kind of take a study of this magnitude and move it to the comp plan is that it needs to be a very specific element of the comp plan, much like we have transportation, much like we would have an economic analysis or economic development. There's a list of very specific pieces that we're trying to test, ultimately the values and the vision and policy direction. So it is this study that I believe, if it moves to the comp plan, will be drilled in very specific policy direction coming out of the comp plan about how housing integrates with the rest of these elements. I'll give you an example, it's transportation. I think what I've seen in other cities is that when you look at a transportation model, you're trying to understand the housing stock and where people are coming in or out of a community. And so it has an effect on the transportation network. And so if you do not do anything with housing, what does that mean? And so one of the outcomes of that is going to be an impact on public infrastructure, streets. So can you afford to allow basically your workers to come out from outside of the city and in? What is the impact to the physical public infrastructure? Road widths, number of lanes, intersection improvements, versus the cost in policy direction of trying to somehow create a balanced housing stock to allow the workers to stay within the city. What is that cost against the public infrastructure? That's kind of one example of why you want to integrate as an element housing in a comp plan.
Kyle?
I think it's vital to have this integrated. How do you see this integrated as just basically the whole document, word for word shoved into the comp plan, or more the outcome, the policy points of it being referred to into the...
Well, I think this is probably where more discussion needs to happen with staff and also our consultant, Kendrick Keast here, who's working our comp plan. But I think in my view, we'd probably treat it like many of the other studies. In fact, one of the more recent ones was the Mineral Light Rail Station Plan framework. I think it's a document that we certainly want reflected in the comp plan process. So my guess is that large parts of it will probably move right into the comp plan and into an element for housing. But I wouldn't be surprised if there comes out of that discussion some very specific policy direction priorities that maybe are not quite as bold or as obvious in this particular report.
Peggy?
Yeah, so I have a little confused on some stuff. So there are people who like to come here to work and don't necessarily want to live here. They love where they live. There are people who live here who love where they work and it's not here. And they love going to the mountains, going to the airport, to go wherever they go. So it's not like we are and this is not meant as an attack on what you said, it's just recognizing. It's a very dynamic South Metro and larger metro issue in my mind. And we could build all kinds of stuff and tons of people could come, but there might be a price war, and the people that we really like to be accommodating don't get into it because the prices just get driven up. I don't find this as easily a contained issue as it sort of sounds, in my mind.
Well, I would agree that this is complex and that being in a metro area, we are influenced by many things, many decisions that people make. And so this is why, in my view, that you take a comp plan and you set policy direction and then you measure your success. And that's why cities come back and actually update their comp plans periodically, because they've collected information to understand that is the policy direction actually working or not.
I think what I'm saying is you can't too easily undo something if you made some major decisions that change things. if people then say, my God, what have we done here? We can't say plunk the magic finger and take us back 5 years or something. It's just, my mind's going to have to really wrap around this better.
Well, and that's the challenge with the comp plan and all the elements. It's not easy. And so we're going to have to use our best judgment to be conservative in the policy direction, and hopefully that we have success and that we don't necessarily have, as you say, big mistakes.
And it's also applying a level of flexibility to the plans as things do change. We suffer this recession, and then all of a sudden we have this housing thing, we get this construction defects. Those are things that comp plans done 20 years ago didn't forecast, but cities have to adjust for. So part of it is including that flexibility in whatever planning documents we do have.
You guys are basically going down the same road I am. This is an important enough study in my mind that it's almost outdated already. It's by the time we roll this into our comp plan, it's going to be 2 years old. So this is, I think, a piece of the comp plan that probably needs to be revisited every year or two, and see what's really changed in the community. Maybe not to the depth that you guys have already done it, but certainly the demographics of number. We're at 45,000. What are we in 2 more years population-wise? So little things like that can really help us. And what's our senior population versus our younger people out there.
So another piece of all this, although I know it's not this aspect of it, is what things are built of, what they're made of, and the quality, so that in 20 years people are going to want things as much as they do when they initially get built, because it's so easy to build things that will attract people, but they don't hold up well. The materials, so I'm hoping we'll encourage that piece, because the durability, the sort of, I wouldn't say classicness, because that's not the right word, but things that hold up.
Okay, Council, any other questions? We need to get this wrapped up. Karina?
No questions, just a comment. I think what my expectation is that it's not just another chapter in the comprehensive plan. It's very important that this informs and is integrated into the different neighborhoods, areas that we talk about in the comp plan, that then eventually, again, this becomes actionable when we get to the point of zoning, and when we get to the point of land use. And so for me, my ask and is that this is integrated and not just another chapter. Otherwise, we lose the value of this information, and then you're right. Then it just does become a standstill, and we can't afford to do this every 2 years, right?
Okay, Council, any other comments? Do you have what you need?
I do, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so our next item is transportation project updates, and I believe that will be presented by Mr. Rooster. Hello.
It just needs a yellow hat. It could be. Yep. That's what I was thinking.
I got kids.
So
I had every one of those books. Come on.
this is your presentation, and this is the first we're seeing of it? Okay.
Yeah, there was, Mark was out of town, so we were
Bring
making
it out.
sure that we had everything covered when I came to chat with everybody tonight.
Okay. Dog ate his homework.
This wasn't on the agenda, or was it in our packet?
It says verbal update,
Oh.
so I'm verbally updating. Wait, time. So, Keith Rooster, Public Works Director. The city manager and I thought that it was worthwhile to just visit with council for a few minutes to talk about some of the things that are going on sort of here in the city and on a bigger picture related to the transportation world as we go forward. And this is really just kind of an overview. It's a chance to share some info and also to, ask some questions, and as we get into some more things, to follow up for everybody if you have any specific questions. There's 3 items that are attached to the materials tonight. 2 of them were actually created for the mayor in preparation for some discussion she was having with the Metro Mayors Conference Group. related to one particular ballot initiative that's forthcoming, expected on the fall ballot. And then the other one is a summary of 3 larger projects that are occurring that are going to have community engagement in the next sort of 60 to 90 days. So the first one that I wanted to highlight, this page right here, the single page, is just sort of a one-page cut sheet of some basic information. So what the diagram shows is that on an annual basis here in Littleton, we receive about 1.4 million in HUTF funds, Highway User Tax Funds. That's your gas tax. The way that's divided out in virtually all the states is based on your lane miles. And there's a ratio that backs into the state total. Of the gas tax that you pay, not all of it is coming directly back here. There are several cuts off the top that go to the federal government, to FTA, to states, to a variety of other things. If you want more detail on that, we are more than happy to provide that. We've had a gas tax in the United States since the 1930s, and the first gas tax was passed for the reason of deficit reduction. It didn't have anything to do with transportation. And in fact, most of the increases in the gas tax in the years since have been for deficit reduction and not for transportation. So it's kind of a misnomer that that's where a lot of it's going, but that's what comes back to us in direct gas tax. So we're guaranteed that each year. That money is restricted to transportation. Earlier this year, the Colorado legislature and the governor passed SB 18001, which is a bill that allocates funding for transportation here in the state. The vast majority of it goes to CDOT to support the budget, and then there's a 20% cut off the top that goes to local governments, half of which goes to counties, half of which goes to cities. The way that's divided out is directly on the HUTF ratio. Take the total pot, use the HUTF ratio, that's the money that you get. The money that's being allocated in 2018 to us, we anticipate to be $346,000. The state treasurer has not come out with what that's going to be. That's a predictive number by CML. We anticipate that we're going to know that number in the next few weeks. We'll receive a check sometime in September or thereabouts. And so it's so late in the year, what we've actually done is sort of plan for utilizing that in 2019. Just because it's so late in the year, we couldn't really get projects out the door, those kind of things. So that's this year. Next year, that number drops to $116,000. And then after that, it goes away. There's several provisions in the bill that, depending on citizen ballot initiatives and other things, that may provide some ballot initiatives beyond that, but that's all dependent on what happens at the ballot box now. It is anticipated that a compromise transportation item will go on the ballot for a 0.62 statewide sales tax to fund transportation. 80% of that money or thereabouts is going to go to CDOT to allow them to accelerate work by bonding against that revenue stream for the next 20 years. It'll have a 20-year sunset horizon on that. That's the vast majority of the money. There's also a cutaway for local governments, and that's sort of what this third hump in the road is over here. If 153 in its current form, still not in the ballot yet, was to pass, that would equate to about, well, I gotta put my glasses on for a second, $1.5 million a year. So what does that mean for us? That means about $31 million over 21 years that would come to Littleton for transportation spending on 0.62. So obviously that's a fair amount of money compared to in that same time period, we would historically budget about $27 million if you just look at our HUTF number, because that's what our history says here. We're going to budget HUTF number and maybe a little here and there more, but that's our history. Hopefully we won't be in that state in the future, but so that's what it looks like. So what I prepared as part of that, yes?
Question. My brain is trying to translate 20 years out. So that much money is over a 20-year period?
Correct.
So will we get the same amount each year?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean,
So,
well,
so in 20 years of rewarding $100,000?
Pretty much,
Okay.
pretty much. Yeah, obviously, yeah, that's the one thing we.
Exaggerating a little.
Yeah, no, I mean, the good part is hopefully sales tax revenue would continue to increase over time. So we would get some increases in revenue. So the 1.5 is kind of a static projection number. But much like the gas tax in America has not been increased at the federal level for over 30 years. And obviously our buying power during that time has declined. So it's kind of the same effect.
I'm just trying to be realistic.
So what does that mean for us? So what I put together is this memo right here. And as you all know, we're in the process of the RFP for the Transportation Master Plan will hit the street hopefully next week. If everything goes well, it'll hit the street next week. And so what is going to be reflected eventually in that plan is we've kind of got our best guess of what's probably going to be in that plan over time. At a baseline, we need about close to $4 million a year to do preventative maintenance in this community. Historically, we spent about 1.4 to 1.7. And we've talked about that pavement condition stuff before. So what this memo lays out is here's what we're spending in 2018 based on what we have budgeted, including the TABOR funds, is on page 1. Page 2 shows what we expect to have in 2019, which is the HUTF funds, the SB 101, which I mentioned is, kind of those 2 years combined because of the rollover effect. And then about 465 out of the general fund, which we're already doing in some ways. And then, you had a question, Pat?
Yeah, how about if the fire passes, or I don't see that 3.1 million.
Even in 19, that 3.1 won't be in there.
Is it right there, am I just not seeing it?
No, it's not going to be there because your contract.
Well, 19, no.
So 19, it's not in there yet. Right. So so even if the 3.1 comes in, I guess the easiest way to put this is we're really close to build out as a community. Our infrastructure is fairly set at this point in time. What we're facing as we go forward is two components. We are facing preservation of our existing infrastructure, and we are talking capacity. And so what capacity means is more turn lanes at intersections. Generally, you spend your money on the nodes and the links in between, and that's how you add capacity to the system. Littleton really doesn't have any transportation impact fees to speak of. So the cost of that expansion over time is going to come from the tax base here in this community or other resources. And so the 3.1 is generally going to fall in. So if you take the HUTF and the vast majority of that 3.1, you're a little past the preservation number. And then we're starting to talk about capital projects after that, which means improvements to the signal system, capacity improvements in intersections, safety improvements. We're hopeful to have an ADA transition plan developed for the infrastructure by January. We completed the assessment. As of this juncture, we have about 4,700 non-compliant locations in our infrastructure right now that we have to take a look at. That's not including the facilities. So we've got a large kind of track in front of us. So what I tried to do, if you look at 2021 and beyond, if you look at that additional $1.5 million a year, what does that translate into? What we currently know we're going to get and what we can get on top of that, and what's that gap between the deferred levels of funding. And that's kind of what's laid out there. You'll see that in a lot more detail as we get through the Transportation Master Plan. But a lot of the things that you see in there, capacity improvements, flow improvements, one of the things we historically haven't done here either, which the state money is kind of important, is we've never set aside money for local match dollars. So if we're going to go out and chase outside grant funding, we got to assume that we're going to pay at least 20% of that money to get the money. And we historically haven't set aside money. And the good part about the state money coming in is we can use that as local match to federal dollars. There's a limited amount of times you can use federal dollars to local match federal dollars. I know that sounds kind of convoluted, but you got to come up with different pots to leverage your money. And that's important to us because, for example, trying to build out a fiber system to connect all of our signals. We can chase money for that out of congestion mitigation and air quality through the transportation plan, but we're still going to have local match money to execute on that. So let's say that's $450,000. 20% of that, we're going to need 100 to get to play at the party. So we just that's where that extra state money can be matched to the local. So this is just kind of a summary of where we are and what the future looks like. There'll be a lot more details we get in the transportation master plan, but this is kind of a look ahead of, we know this is going to be on the ballot. Here's some information out here that'll all help you understand kind of what that looks like and how that impacts where we are, where our gap is, and where we are eventually going to need to be as a community, probably. We get flying cars, that may change. I won't have to buy as much asphalt. But I may have to fly, the police may have aircraft or something, I don't know.
Okay, so you talked about the match that's expected from the local municipalities. That's not here at all, no. And so we do have some things that we're putting forward this year, and so we do have to earmark that money. So where and how are we earmarking that money?
That is our challenge for the 2019 budget.
So some options would be, we go through the budget, I guess we'll identify if there's any opportunities, or we have to take something off the list today in order to earmark the money for something tomorrow.
And an example like that is we've already set aside in the budget document that you'll see has about $270,000 in the transportation budget as set aside for our component of the local match for the PEL study. So we're going to need $3 million total, 50% match on that, and $1.5 million spread out amongst all our partners. Our number is going to be somewhere between 200 and 275 is where I'm guessing. And that kind of moves every day, like based on emails I got today. So we'll see where that falls. So that's how we got to set that money aside. When we think about fiber, the call for projects that'll probably put us in the fiber funding pot is going to come in the summer of 19. That money will fall in 20. So we need to figure out what we need in that 20% match in the 2020 budget to make sure we can leverage those dollars to execute. So.
Mayor, I think just adding to Keith's comments here, I think as we get into the budget process with council, remember we're making a big leap into a 5-year fiscally constrained capital plan for the first time. So I think this is why Keith is kind of hitting some of the points why it's perhaps obvious that we need to do a 5-year plan, because a lot of these state and federal funds you need to kind of plan for and be ready and look at longer term. So when you do an annual budget by itself, it's really insufficient to kind of chase a lot of these grants here for transportation. Now, obviously, we have a significant shortfall in the capital project funding to deal with the capacity issue, as Keith has kind of pointed out. If the ballot issue here on our fire and street maintenance is successful here in November, then we obviously have a long ways of addressing the street maintenance. But one piece, though, I would like you, Keith, to kind of touch on, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on you a little bit, but is talk about the PEL, specifically the Santa Fe and Mineral, and the work that we're doing now with the county and CDOT.
Absolutely. So this other particular piece that's here, there's really 3 components that I kind of called out here, and this is also kind of a heads up to everyone here that there's going to be a series of community engagement processes coming up over the next several months. And what Mark was referring to is, we're pretty highly engaged. Karina and Kyle are a little more tied into this as our kind of transportation folks at the moment. We anticipate that the PEL study will be the #1 regional project proposed for the TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan, for 2020 to 2023 out of the Arapahoe County subregion. There's one other project we expect, but that's probably going to be the #1 project. We're anticipating that'll be about $3 million. All of the partners that we have at the table so far that have made a verbal financial commitment include Littleton, Sheraton, Englewood, Arapahoe County, Douglas County, Denver City and County, and CDOT to bridge that gap between 1.5 and 3. So we're trying to get Jeffco in there, but we're not sure that's going to happen. So I offered to trade them trail mark or something like that in exchange, but, since they're all the way over there, but they haven't taken that yet. So, so we've got, so we're kind of working our way through that. progress right now. And we anticipate that call for projects is due in the next 45 days, and we anticipate that that'll go in as the #1 project. We feel very strongly with the concurrence from the state and everybody else that we feel that's going to come out. If it does, where we would anticipate that that would be in the 2020 federal funding year, which makes it a hit in mid-2019. CDOT has made it clear that they are going to manage that project. It will not be a local agency managed project. Been a lot of arm wrestling on that, but we haven't successfully arm wrestled it away yet, but that's kind of where we're going on that. So as a lead up to that, there's actually 2 projects in here which are directly tied that'll feed into the PEL. The first one that's on the first page is actually one that the mayor's involved in, which is the South Platte Working Group, and it's an east-west connectivity study between sort of, Santa Fe kind of bifurcates the river from everything else. And so this is really a study that's going to look at connectivity for especially bikes and pedestrians, east-west to the Mary Carter Greenway, all the way up and down Santa Fe with all of our partners along that. That's already out there on the street. FHU is working on that project now. And there are several public engagement opportunities coming up for that, including if you'd like to be riding on the trail next week and participate in one of those at 6 o'clock in the morning, you are more than welcome to. So we're out there engaging with people that are out there and those kind of things. So that one's underway. There's a lot of project data on that. There's a project website, some survey data that's there. The next one is we have started the process of identifying design options for Mineral in Santa Fe. And what this does is this is going to allow us to narrow down the potential intersection and or interchange alignments that could go there. We're not going to drill down and say what exactly is going to go there, but we'll probably end up with 3 or 4 potential options. And then what it allows us to do is understand what the necessary right-of-way envelope is for us to build that in the future, so we don't let that land footprint get away from us. And an example of that is, in the Santa Fe Park North development, they are in for development review, and so it's in our best interest to complete that study now, so that when we have to acquire that land in the future, which we will, that it's not, we're not buying buildings, we're buying land. That's the easiest way to put it. Or as we work through other issues, it gives us some discussion and leverage. We're also involved in that as CDOT, Arapahoe County, RTD is engaged in that discussion. Douglas County is also engaged in that discussion because they're going to be pumping a lot of traffic in from the south pretty soon. So we're all at the table as part of that. The last time this occurred here in Littleton, nobody ever talked to CDOT, Arapahoe County, RTD, or Douglas County. So this is not occurring in a vacuum. So, and we expect in the next couple of months to have some idea what that's going to look like. We expect a deliverable in October from that. So there's some public engagement coming up on that. And that's listed in here. There's online. There's already a city web page on the project and those kind of things as well. The third one is we're still in the public engagement process on federal bowls, and that's ongoing. We've already had one open house. We had more than 100 respondents to the online survey. Everything from it's awesome, don't change anything, to great, separate it, and put all the distracted drivers in jail. So those are kind of the range of suggestions we have received on that intersection today. But our designers are working on a stacking of designs that address immediate safety improvements, and then working our way up to an ultimate solution that's going to really do some great things out there over time. So that public engagement is out there ongoing. So that's what's contained in this, and we wanted to give you a heads up if you want to engage in that, or citizens reach out to you or businesses. We want to make sure that you knew that that was coming in advance.
Keith, particularly on the Initiative 153, and perhaps even including some of the HUTF, would it be possible, or even is it something that you even should consider is bonding against that, so that some of these projects can get done and started instead of dragging out over 20 years, where we know what happens, the cost just escalates. So what you can do now for 1,000, we would spend 10,000 in 20 years.
Absolutely, that's certainly an option. I mean, that's what, if 153 passes, that's what the state's doing.
All right.
And so from my perspective as a public works director and working with the rest of the staff here, that's why it's so important for us to make sure we've got a 5 and 10-year CIP out there, that we've got a transportation master plan, so we can say to the community, this is where you're going. This is where your money's going to be, and if you accelerate it now, this is what's going to happen. An example of that is what Sheridan did. Sheridan basically went out and got a $30 million bond initiative, and they're paving every single street, originally in a 7-year time window, and now they're going to do it in 4.
With money left over.
So they can use that money to pay for the PL or something, I guess, So that's kind of where, it gives us a chance to accelerate that, take advantage of our construction dollars. Some of the things we're hearing out there around the state, other discussions are, okay, so if it goes through a 0.62, maybe a county says we want to put in a sales tax of 3.38 to take it to a full cent. So we're matching it in total, and in essence, as a county, we're bringing in a full cent of sales tax revenue and dedicating that to transportation. For somebody like, say, in Arapahoe County, that would be important because you've got a county that's long and thin with very different needs across the county. So there's discussions in other jurisdictions around the state about, supplementing that if it goes to the 0.62, you fill it out with a further as a local sales tax to help that. So those are other strategic discussions I know are kind of floating around out there on the professional level too. So, but yeah, it's definitely an opportunity to do that.
Any other questions? Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, any other information you want, just feel free to let us know. We're more than happy to talk about roads. Because they're very, very exciting.
Yes.
Very exciting. So I'm going to actually ask Brett Collins from South Suburban Parks and Rec to come on up here and join me for a few minutes.
This is our third item on the agenda. City of Littleton support for $100,000 in funding for advanced design 2019-2020 South Suburban. This was actually when we did the budget in September 2017. At that time, the council kind of put in abeyance, I guess would be the word, holding pattern, the $100,000 asked for by South Suburban, and part that was because there was nothing defined and there was nothing very specific. It was, can we have $100,000 next year? And we said, well, maybe. What do you want to buy? What do you want to do? And so I'm assuming, that's why you're here this evening, you've got some clarity. Council, I think that this is something that we'll need to move to our resolution or an ordinance.
I think it's a resolution here, budget revised budget.
Yeah, the resolution that we'll move to a regular business meeting in order to move this money, if in fact that's what council decides they want to do.
So with the mayor's intro there, appreciate that. So I've asked Brett, he manages all the projects and the design over at South Suburban, so we brought him over from a different part of the neighborhood tonight to join us for some more detail. And so basically, just kind of a little background in general, and we put some slides together with some background information here that we kind of put together today. And, historically we have a long partnership with South Suburban, jointly building projects, and we fund that through our open space funds. One of the discussions that we've had over the last few years is we had gotten into a cycle where South Suburban was designing and seeking to deliver projects in the same calendar year, which can be challenging, especially as the magnitude and difficulty of projects increases. So as part of our discussion at a staff level, we meet at a minimum on a quarterly basis. We talk through strategy and projects and design. And so as part of that initiative, South Suburban has moved to a model where they're doing advanced design work, much like we would do on the roadside, doing design work in 18 for projects in 19 and 20. It allows tighter construction budgets, schedule, better bidding opportunities, all those kind of things. So that's what this $100,000 set aside is. It's to allow the acceleration of design so that we've got the design done in 18 for 19 projects and beyond. The good part of that too is it also allows us to do a better job when we start chasing grant funding with Arapahoe County, and we make sure we're more precise in those efforts. So this 100 was set aside during the budget discussion because it was unclear where the 5-year projects were going. So let me see if I go in the right direction. So basically, I just kind of covered that right there about where we're going and what we're doing. So this is the document that you have in your packet. There's one slight modification because there was a math error in the original one, but basically what this shows is, it's great, I got two diagrams up here that I can't read because I don't have my glasses on because it's behind me. So basically what this shows is the next 5 years worth of projects that we would be partnering on. This doesn't include Hudson Gardens, South Flat Park, or Mary Carter Greenway projects. Those are generally handled differently. And so these are the projects over the next few years, the year in which design would occur, the year in which construction would occur, the share that Littleton's putting in and South Suburban is putting in to deliver those projects. We also line that up with the master plan goals that we have here in our adopted master plan that the city adopted in 2016 for open space and recreation and trails, as well as South Suburban's master plan, and that's in the right-hand column up on the screen. I also included those goals in the council packet, just kind of took that as a couple of several pages out of the existing master plan so you could see what those goals were. So, you know, this is the 5-year look ahead, and Brett did a really nice job of putting together kind of a listing of those projects and what's driving those projects, and you know, if you want to take a minute or two and kind of run through this.
Again, Brett Collins, Director of Planning and Development for South Suburban Parks and Recreation. See a few new faces here on the council. So really what I'm here tonight is to kind of continue the partnership with the city, and I'm asking that you partner with us for $80,000 on the 2018 projects, and we're trying to get those designed before October so we can come back to the council and actually ask for some funding for 19 to build them. And again, Keith, I'll reiterate what Keith said, that really helps us out in the Arapahoe County Open Space Grants if we're shovel ready. And if you notice on 19, there's a couple projects there that are Arapahoe County Open Space Grants. So really what's driven this, I think Keith explained it well, was where the master plans overlapped, our master plan and the city's master plan overlapped. That's kind of where we see the projects needing to be. And then a lot of these projects, if you can take a look at, we have the youngest project's 20 years old here and up to 46 years old. And so I think that kind of says a lot about, you know, what the priority is on these. They're really, if you look at pictures of them, they don't show it, but when you walk out there and look at the parks and stuff, they just aren't up to quality standards that are in Centennial and Lone Tree and some of these other places we're seeing. And some of the stuff we've been doing in Littleton lately that is really nice. If you go to Little's Creek and Charlie Emily and Writers Vista, those new playgrounds and those new upgrades are kind of the more state-of-the-art stuff with the rubber surfacing and those kind of things. So it really is, you know, we really need to do these projects to really, quality first is one of our main principles that we're trying to do throughout the district and within all the cities that we serve. So just kind of going over Hamlet Park, again, the budget there is we're looking to cost share $20,000 for the design work. This is the design only. We need to get a little bit better ADA access into the playground. It's a very dated shelter, one picnic table underneath. There's some stuff going on with cracking in the concrete in the basketball court. There's the equipment's old and outdated. The play value really isn't there. It's not really what you want to do. Can you still use it? Can you still go out there and play on it? Yeah, but I kind of equate that to after 20 years, 25 years, if you didn't remodel your house, your kitchen or something like that, you know, you can still use it, but it really isn't a state-of-the-art type of facility.
It just becomes retro.
It becomes retro sometimes, or in this case, it keeps rusting and eventually does probably fall apart.
I really want those, the seesaws that you can go really high, then the other person jumps off and you fall.
Not allowed anymore.
Yes.
You got to go to a foreign country to see those most times now.
So Hamlet, you know, it's a playground renovation, shelter, basketball court, and, you know, replacing the trail and just getting up to standards. We did have an HOA request for this in 2017, and that kind of started to drive the need to do it. And then also Hamlet is also located in an area where there really isn't any other playgrounds for those homes in that part of Littleton. You'd have to get in your car and drive somewhere. It serves a specific group in that area, so I think it's definitely a need out there. Moving on to Harlow Park, jumped one. Harlow Park, again, budget's split $77,500. We have some tennis courts out there that are, 2 of them are going on 46 years old now. And then, as near as I can tell, the other 2 were built sometime between 72 and 80. So, and then we've just been overlaying and patching and repaving those. So you can kind of see all the patchwork in there. And it just, for anybody that plays tennis, it's just not a good situation out there. They need to be redone. There isn't really a good ADA access up to the tennis courts. So we want to replace those, and then we have the ball field. There's no ADA access, and I know Keith mentioned earlier you guys are going through a citywide study on ADA, and we're doing the same thing. And in 2010, they made new law for parks, trails, and open space to upgrade ball fields. And a lot of our ball fields are older, and we don't have. You can kind of see in that upper right-hand corner, there's not even concrete in front of the bleachers. There's no really ADA access to get anybody in there if they even wanted to come watch a game. Same with the, kind of the right-hand corner to the bleachers. It's not even on concrete access to get in there. So, new picnic table, new shelters, and then there's 2 ball fields there that we'd renovate. There's one in the right-hand corner and in the lower left-hand corner. And then the third one's Riders Vista. Oops, I keep doing that. Budget $62,500 we're looking for, and we want to update the restroom and shelter out there, and then do better ADA access in the restroom. The restrooms aren't currently ADA accessible as they're older. There's some structural problems with the concrete, that kind of thing. And this shelter was kind of a neat design, I think, back when it was put in. But it doesn't really function very well. It kind of looks, I think back then it might have looked pretty cool with the 3 things, but when it rains from the west or a wind blows from the west and you're in the shelter, it doesn't offer any, because the way it's, kind of open in between those different roof systems, so.
Wasn't the playground at Riders Vista just redone?
Yeah, we just did the Riders Vista playground upgrade, and that we did ADA access and new fencing and dugouts and everything we'd be doing at Harlow there. So we're trying to continue that and finish that park out really, and make that a really quality park and have everything new and updated.
Did you do some renovations on the restroom at one point recently?
I think we did some insulation in the restroom and that kind of thing, and some of the plumbing we needed to fix.
Because I think it was closed during the winter, and you made accommodations for it to stay open.
Yeah, with the insulation.
And at that time, you did not do anything other than that?
No. We just wanted to be able to open it year round.
And so now it needs more.
Well, it's just not. It's literally not ADA accessible in there. And then we would want to. What we do here is we would just take out the shelter and the restroom, and we would do more like what you're seeing at Stern Park. If you've been to Stern Park recently with the new restroom that's being built there, or the one we did at Littleton by Littleton Golf Course on Mary Carter Green Lake Trail. Probably do one of those units separate from the shelter, and then do a new, larger shelter there with more picnic tables under it. Let's update the whole thing. So this is kind of the summer. If I can go back, I can't work this time. All right, so this is kind of the summary, and you have that in front of us, the ask for 2018. And then the idea here is to take those funds, get things designed by October, really is what we're looking at doing, which is a very short time frame now. We're trying to get to design development or construction drawings where we can on them, get a good budget estimate, because we'll know what we're building. And then I'd like to come back at some point in your budget process and ask for funds. I would estimate about October. I'm not sure those are the exact numbers we'd ask for, but that's our best estimate at this point for those projects. Now, and you can see there's quite a bit of Arapahoe County open space funds in there. And I'm proposing that we would partner with the city, and we would use one of the city's Arapahoe County open space grants. We'd use one of South Suburban's Arapahoe County open space grants for those, but we would provide the grant writing, the grant monitoring, and all the paperwork and everything that goes along with the grants, like we're doing with Bulls Grove now. And I think that's worked out really well on that project.
Could you translate what you just said?
Yeah.
With the grants?
So sure, yeah. So
in terms of grants, how much are we looking at coming out of that?
So up here, if you look at the right-hand column, it's probably the easiest thing to do. Yeah, this is the bottom line here. South Suburban would be putting in approximately that much. Littleton's, and then we're looking for $1 million from Arapahoe County Open Spaces on that.
In grants.
In
That's-
grants.
that's where the grants
That's where
are.
the
So
grants
you're
are,
looking-
correct. So there's 500,000 in this project and 500,000 in riders.
Almost 600,000 out of our pocket.
Correct, and we've been doing that pretty much on an annual basis, about 500,000 to 600,000 in projects.
What we've been doing is getting a little more exciting in every aspect of our existence. So, and that's not meant as a fault at you, it's just that it's going to be exciting budget discussions.
So kind of a couple of things, just to kind of fill in around that, and we'll be pretty much done with the presentation. I checked with Tiffany earlier today, right before I came in here, and we're estimated at the end of 2018 to have about $3 million in reserves in the open space fund, is what our current reserves are. So it's not like we're dipping into any other place. This is all open space money. It's what we're funding. I actually, one of the things that's really come up since we started this discussion earlier in the year is Arapahoe County Open Space used to have 2 call for projects during the year, a spring and a fall cycle. They moved to a one-time per year cycle in April. So you got to be ready and on your game and have your design and everything ready to go really in February, so you can get your document prep in and your applications in for April. So that, from a timing perspective, we got to just be more on our game. The other thing that I do want to highlight is we were going through the projects there, and Brett was highlighting some of the things in there. One of the things that we're working on in the background with them too is we have great neighborhood parks, but frankly we have really poor bike and pedestrian accessibility to our neighborhood parks. We have many parks where there are no adjoining sidewalks, as an example. And so one of the things that we're working on is sort of that merger of transportation planning, multimodal planning, transit planning, and how that interconnects with our park and recreation facilities to enhance the overall quality of life component of that section of our services here in the community that we jointly provide. So that's something that's also kind of going on in the background from a staff perspective as we look at projects. And I just, one last point to kind of give you a laugh here is, so Stern Park, as you know, is ongoing. And so South Suburban came to us, and if you don't know, most of Stern Park is in a floodway. So when you talk about floods, you have a floodplain where it spreads out, and you have a floodplain way where the water goes like this. And most of the playground there is in the floodway. And so the way the regulation is written is you have to replace like with like. Well, if you remember what the old Stern Park looked like, yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. We'd probably have to go to somewhere in the third world out of the country and round up some old monkey bars, and that would have been our replacement. So we had to... Yep, absolutely. So we had to go through an extensive process to figure out how we were going to put the new playground in. And then even when we were going through that, we went to tie in the new restroom, and the contractor called all of us and said, I don't even know what this pipe is, which is really related to that other sewer project we have going on. All of us are looking at this one image going, I don't know what that is either. So, it's just part of that, all the infrastructure fitting together. So that's kind of what we wanted to bring y'all from a staff perspective. We'd really like to put a resolution on next week to see if we can release this and move the design forward. We've also got some great projects going on at the river with the Reynolds Landing. As you all know, we just took over the Saperchi property. And so we're in the process of securing the site, doing all the things that we need to down there. And then we're going to integrate that into the next series of design work around the river corridor, and urban drainage is leading some great stuff out there as well right now. So we've got some really good stuff going on out there too. So that's all out there. So that's really the crux of our presentation there.
Keith, you said we had a $3 million budget. Where is that money? How's that money get built up?
Arapahoe County Open Space Tax.
Okay.
The share back money.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Keith,
Karina?
there's a $20,000. You're only asking for 80. You would have
Right.
to ask
So
for the other
they're asking for 80. There's a $100,000 proviso, and I've asked to release that additional 20 because we've got some immediate short-term needs that we need to do relating to the Saperchi property now that we took it over on July the 18th that we think is pretty important. So,
Karina?
So What's important to recognize here is that if we are approving the design, in essence, we're committing, again, we could always stop after the design phase. I know it's clear cut, but I think this is something that I would rather see during our 2019 budgeting process, because we really have to make the decision that we're willing to invest $600,000, which I don't see why we wouldn't, but again, having not gone through that yet, that's my hesitation right now. I expect the design phase is extremely important for the grant writing and the Railroad County space, but unless you tell me you're going to run out of time and you won't make it April, that's a hesitation that I have. And what I would also appreciate is similar to what you actually did for transportation, because as you said, we have $3 million in funds right now. There will be other sources of funds in subsequent years. And then what are all the projects? Because right now, 80,000 doesn't seem a lot, but when it's 80,000 and then maybe something else for Hudson Gardens or et cetera, that 3 million maybe really doesn't seem as much. So I'm lacking the visibility to understand this versus maybe next week another project will come.
So I'll respond to both of those things. The $80,000, $100,000 we're talking about tonight was actually in the 2018 budget that we discussed last fall. So this is a holdback from that last fall. So this has kind of been out there for 10 months at this point in time. So that was part of that budget discussion process. The bigger picture, one of the things that Mark and I worked on with the staff at South Suburban and with the mayor and also with their board chair is kind of the creation of an executive discussion group so that all of those parts and pieces are fitting together, because South Suburban is considering how are they moving forward with Hudson Gardens and those kind of community amenities. So that is an ongoing discussion. I know because I just saw it on our calendar in the next, I think, week and a half or so when I was reviewing the calendar today. So that kind of discussion is ongoing because the Hudson Gardens discussion is really sort of accelerated at the staff level in the last just few months. This kind of 5-year plan is a new effort by us. Most of our other partners, other cities, the South Suburban, have a ongoing funding agreement that's already been laid out. So all this is enunciated in a long-term funding agreement that hasn't come forward to this body yet. We talked about that a little bit last year, but it hasn't come forward. We, at the staff level, we're supportive of that for sure, so that there's more clarity over time. And I agree with you. If you look at our master plan that we've adopted in 2016, there's a great deal of detail in that about projects, priority of projects, what's important, and all of those things are kind of enunciated in the plan. And so all of the projects as we move forward with South Suburban are based on the tenets of that plan that was adopted by City Council in 2016.
And I would just also add to that, the whole thinking here is that we're using these planning and design to actually set the budgets for 19. So if we get to a certain level of design development, construction drawings, then we know what we're building, we can do takeoffs and have a really good budget number for 19. And that's really what we're trying to do, because the way construction prices are now, things are going up. It's hard to anticipate that budgeting it all in 1 year like we've been doing it. We've been trying to budget the planning, design, and construction all in 1 year, which hasn't been working well. We've been managing it, but a lot of times what you end up doing is either value engineering the project, drop something out of the project if you can't do it, and sometimes you can do that and sometimes you can't, or you're coming back to the board or the council to ask for additional funds to make the project work. So this helps. This is going to help us have a better number and a more accurate cost estimate to ask for 2019 funds. So I would say if we don't move forward now, it would put us behind, not necessarily for the grants, but for the ask in 19.
So, as Mark would say, if I may. You did that really well. Karina, you read my mind from a year ago. One of the reasons, and I was really vocal about not approving this $100,000 in 2018, because one of the things that started to happen with us and the open space money is that there was a very clear vision for a number of years as to exactly what we wanted to do with, specifically through the South Platte Working Group and along the river with the open space money. There was opportunities to buy land that was at great risk for cheap sale to the wrong person. The Murray open space is an example of that, where there was just deserted old buses out there, and we were able to buy a lot of this property, this at-risk property, very inexpensively at that time. And so we had a substantial amount of money in the open space fund, and the South Platte Working Group organized very, very strongly around creating a coalition of interested people in terms of helping to support those. So the great thing about the South Platte Working Group is that when you spend a dime out of our open space money, the City of Littleton's share back, you actually get a dollar's worth of value from that, because you have so many partners paying in and partnering on these projects. We could never do them by ourselves. Well, over time, what's happened is, in my opinion, is that the South Platte Working Group, we're no longer purchasing that kind of property anymore. We bought a lot of it, and there's not a lot more out there. There's a couple things that I have a bit of an interest in, which at some point we'll need to talk about. But there's also then the restrictions of our open space money, and we can't do maintenance and stuff like that with it. So we have restrictions, and we have needs. We have projects, we have things that we've started, things that we've planned, things that we haven't. So I am really, really hesitant to move forward with anything. I appreciate the ask tonight, and I actually, part of where I'm heading with this is not a denial from me in terms of that. But I really am going to ask of council that we put a lot more, we put some resources towards evaluating what our priorities are in spending that $3 million, which can grow one or more $1 million a year. It's about our average share back is around $1 million. Good economy can get a little bit higher. We do have opportunities for these grants. We can apply for these grants and get them ourselves. We don't do that. We have others who want to use our opportunity to get the grants to do that. South Suburban does it most frequently with them. But we do have that opportunity for ourselves. So we do have an opportunity for more than what we think we have. We do have our partnerships. South Suburban is obviously a major partner with us. Littleton Public Schools, clearly. We're doing playgrounds. We just approved a playground, Celeste Playground, and we've done a number of those. South Platte Working Group is another partnership that we have. But we don't know what our priorities are. We bought a bunch of open space over off of County Line called Olson Acres, and it is sitting there in a ratty, messy, nobody wants to go there condition. We got a big old sign up there that says Olson Acres, but that's it. That is not what the intention of the open space money was. It was to buy properties that would become community amenities, places where people could go and get a break from the craziness of all. So where are those things? Where are those opportunities? Keith brings up Saperchi. That is a major, major opportunity for us. Yeah, there's master plans. Years ago, other councils, other staffs, I get it, we've got these, they can be amended. We need to look at these. We need to see if our community goals and vision for these places, our parks, trails, and open space, are the same. This is in collision with our comp plan, long term. We have things that we definitely need to do, low or high priority, high need. We have things that are lesser than that. We have things that are very expensive. There's $4 million worth of work in the river at Reynolds Landing. These bathrooms that Brett was talking about are $300,000 to put these in, $250,000. It's not the porta potties anymore. So What my proposal is, or my suggestion would be, and I've got some things outlined, and I also wanted to point out, so the open space, this is their annual report, we got this at the share back, and I don't know that everybody can see it, I'll pass this around, but there's a map in here that shows the little orange dot is the 2017 Community Investment Grants, and you can take a look. Littleton has one dot. That is it, one dot. Our neighbors have multiple dots. So I think we're missing on additional opportunity with that, and part of it is because we don't have a transportation plan that we can get money. We don't have that priority plan. We need to have that conversation. So I put together kind of a rough outline of what could start to happen. We did have a open space task force that we did a number of years ago. Peggy, I'm sure you remember that. Very, very effective. We actually executed against almost all of that. We do have a South Platte River Corridor Vision Plan, a charrette that was done. That South Platte Working Group is diligent about going through and checking off the things that we've done. We've got a number of things on there that need to be done. And I think that we need to take a look at this, the master plan, South Suburban's master plan. A lot of what's on here are playgrounds, and a lot of what else needs to be done in this community is not playgrounds. I'm nothing against playgrounds, but I think that just to do ourselves a service in terms of where are we going to put this money, we really need to have a plan that we all agree on and that we can use, and that South Suburban understands, where we're prioritizing our things too. I put a call into Will Singleton, who facilitates the South Platte Working Group, to ask him what would be consideration in terms of facilitating a group that would work on those priorities, or is there some sort of resource out there that we could use open space funds to bring them in to help do that. It's a bit of an inventory of things, it's a bit of a cost analysis of things. The other thing I want to point out is that on the South Platte Working Group, we have project lists, and we update them. Here's one from 2016, and the most recent one is 2018. And there are some very old projects on here, and there are some projects that need to be done. There's a lot of projects that other cities have completed and that are in different stages. This is what helps get our additional funding. If we can work with like Trust for Public Land to get additional help with some purchasing of some high-risk properties that are kind of coming available at this point. So all this is just linked. It's just all, and these guys, what they just said this evening, there's this, that, and the other thing. Keith's comment about the executive discussion group, that was we used to have the liaison to South Suburban, and so we no longer have someone from council going to South Suburban meetings. So the decision by council was that we would have a meeting with the president of the board and the mayor and city manager and director, and then Keith and others to meet once a month like they do with Lone Tree and just have a conversation. I'm representing council when I go to those meetings, so I feel like if I don't have priorities and understanding that we're all agreeing to, then that's where the conversation is. So my ask also would be just a blessing to pursue this. May end up with a small budget aligned to it, but that I don't mind spending some time working on this to get it done. I just need to know that you guys are supportive of that. Supportive?
I am. I just want to reiterate, I want this to look very different. What I see here in 2020 and beyond, it's still playgrounds, etc. And my expectation is when we're having a conversation about open space funds and where they're going to be used, I'm not just seeing a proposal from South Suburban. It has to be bigger picture.
I agree.
I am still concerned that we are, again, it's $600,000 in 2019 that is being asked of us, as well as, and I don't know how this works, if the Arapahoe County Open Space Funds, that's another $1 million that goes to this. Does that mean that $1 million is not available for maybe something we would want somewhere else? So I'm uncomfortable, but again, this is something, as I said, previous council had earmarked to move forward at this point, and I think obviously there's a need. It's not a lack of need. It's more of a priority question for us.
Is there a inventory or priority list of all the parks that say, hey, this is the number one priority, that's why we're doing it now?
What you see here is based on the Open Space and Trails Parks Master Plan that was adopted by City Council in 2016. And that's on the website. There's a full inventory of there's a map, all asset inventory, project list, all those things is in there as part of that. And that's what, as a staff, we're operating under because that's the adopted plan that we have.
Not just the inventory, but a rating, say, hey, this is the worst condition park that we have.
That is
okay.
So I would have a question though. In 2 years, the worst condition could have flipped around a little bit. And that may be part of what Debbie's also asking for, to make sure that we're really on top of where we need to be.
I don't disagree with that. As your Public Works Director, I have to let you know that we're the only jurisdiction in South Suburban that does not have a staff member dedicated to this particular part of our business. We're talking about millions of dollars a year, and we don't have, and we historically have not had an individual on the staff that's dedicated to dealing with open space and parks and trails. That makes us anomalous to our peers that operate with South Suburban. So that's a reality of part of the path that's gotten us to this point in time as well.
Am I missing something here? Because the parks people are aware of some of the kind of information that we'd like to have. It's not like staff just needs to have it, but it's out there somewhere without, and maybe it's even just gut feeling. But gut feeling is better than nothing.
He also, part of what I would express though is we are one of many partners with South Suburban. So South Suburban's time is divided amongst a number of partners, and we're an equal partner. And so, there's a,
Yeah, but gut feeling doesn't need all that much more action from them. It's putting it in perspective, I think.
I understand that. Karina definitely wants us not to go with gut feeling, so we'll find that good balance. That's part of it.
It's part of it,
Well, I would encourage to take a look at this master plan. I think that there's a lot of the work that they've laid out in here. They put a timeline. There's a timeline to ongoing, short-term, midterm, long-term. That's vague. That's not clear. And I think I'm thinking about a lot more defined priorities. And every couple of years, the council, when it changes over, would re-look at those priorities and recommit to, because these projects take time to do. $4 million in the river at Reynolds Landing is not going to get done in 20 minutes, or even with our budget right now, even in a year. But that commitment, it is a long-term commitment. So that, and then every year during budget time, you guys have a lot more, we're more defined as to what to approve, and there is not this, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? We need $100,000 to design. Well, we give you the $100,000 to design, but then we don't approve it.
Yeah, we're supportive of that. From a staff perspective, the one thing we all want is, it's great, it's clarity, knowing where you're going. It allows you to chase other money that's out there. It allows you to leverage for GoCo money, all of those things. And, it's putting yourself in a position to be successful. It's kind of like we just talked about with transportation. It's the same scenario. And it's building towards that, and the mayor's absolutely right that kind of check in on a regular basis is critical to make sure we're still meeting community needs. And, I joke about this on the side with professionals in this business is, 10 years ago, we never mentioned the word pickleball is a perfect example of this. That's all I'm going to say. If you're not familiar with that, we can.
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Well, we never mentioned that a decade ago. So, those are the things that change and migrate and what you know.
Karina?
So looking at that document, two items that I pointed, that I kind of highlighted and said, why not this? So 4.1.2 D is about incorporating water features. So when I think of just, how we experience our open space, our parks, etc., the time that I leave Littleton is to go to a water feature. So I don't think we have any in Littleton that I can think of. Cornerstone, which is not Littleton. And so that particular one does say, incorporate into features for your parks, but I'm seeing just kind of replacement of what was there, but not necessarily some of these new things. And then the other one that I was looking for was the 4.2, which is you talked about this, Keith, you just said this, about the trails, the connectivity, etc. So we can have great parks, but if I have to dodge a few cars to get there, I'm just not going to go there. So I would, when I start seeing more different things that really bring the community, try to connect these different things, that's what I'm looking for when I say bigger picture, because I just feel this is tactical.
We agree with that. One of the other things, though, that was very clear from the slides tonight is, much like in a lot of our other infrastructure areas, we got a big truckload of deferred maintenance. And so those are things that we definitely have to work into whatever our portfolio of work is, so that we can tackle that. And as we upgrade facilities, we can work in some of those things that you just mentioned along the way.
I look at this and I hear what you're saying. Certainly you guys have the history. You certainly do, Debbie. But I mean, either we put this and make this, get this back to council for a resolution, or we continue to put it off when we know it needs to get done at some point. And so I would like to see this move forward to with staff asking to direct forward a resolution. Let's vote on that and see if. But maybe in the meantime, you guys can, as you also said in there, maybe do a little bit more work. But to meet Karina's and Debbie's curiosity, I don't know what.
I can say for sure, I know the mayor's carrying the torch forward at our executive meetings for sure, so.
I'm ready. I support the 100. I don't, Keith, what do you $20,000 just?
Yeah, we've having one of the things that at the staff level we're working on is we want to make some arrangements for you all to have a tour of this Perchy property, since many of you may not be familiar with the property since we acquired it. Because we just took the property over in July. It's kind of a joint effort with us and the South Suburban staff, but there's some challenges down there that we need to address in the short term. An example of that would be the first time they had concerts at Breckenridge Brewery. There's a whole bunch of people in that property and all the fences vanished along the way. So we've just got to make sure that security is taken care of, and it's an older structure. All the structures are older, so we just got to make sure they all stay standing and those kind of things. So those are just some interim things we got to tackle.
So council, are we okay with bringing the 100,000 back to resolution? All right.
Thanks for the feedback on the bigger picture. We appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you.
Okay, council, let's take a 10-minute break. Yeah.
So, tonight we're here to talk about
The sign code and,
what I would call as the first part of subdivision amendments. Kind of like Star Wars, there will be sequels, but not
And spin-offs
Yeah.
Can we have some Ewoks?
We'll work on the sequels for the future. Maybe we can get George Lucas here for one of them. But with that, let's get to why are we doing this. The subdivision code is really one of the most important codes in this city regulating development. People think of zoning and people think of the comp plan, but the subdivision code is the code that prior to pulling a building permit, it is the final step. If you don't get over the subdivision step, you don't get to the end. So it's extremely an important code. What the code we're looking at is how do we improve the code to allow the city to more efficiently process subdivisions? Because what we want to be is we want to be efficient. And this is really part of what we've been talking to the council about over the last years. How do we continuously improve? How do we do things better? And this is a component of that, doing things better. Now, why should we amend the subdivision code? Well, we have some problems with the current code. One of them is we have provisions governing subdivision in various codes. If I'm a citizen, we, for example, require all property to be built on a subdivided lot. And let's stop here for a second. When we talk about subdivisions, we think of division as a mathematical term. Subdivision is not a mathematical term. For all the mathematicians in the room, we think of it as a mathematical term, but it's really the definition is the establishment of boundaries on property for the purposes of planning, development, and building. So even though we think of division as a mathematical term, it really isn't. Now, first we have, as I mentioned, yes.
so if it's not a mathematical term, what is a subdivision?
A subdivision is the establishment of boundaries for a parcel of land that can be recorded in order to allow that parcel to be built upon or to be developed in some other manner.
Is subdivision something that is done, or is it something that is, or is it both?
It's both. Subdividing is done, and subdivision is the end result.
I think it was in the actual document, I have the re-subdivision because re-subdivision, though it sounds weird, under the, the Standard City Planning Enabling Act, it says subdivision includes re-subdivision.
It does. Now, some other problems. We don't have a procedure right now for correction of errors on plans. I have to tell you, in all my years of working as a city attorney, engineers and architects, with all due respect to the engineer in the room, do make errors on occasion.
It's just architects, it's not engineers.
I have seen plats, the lot line is in the wrong place, the notes are wrong, errors are made. Right now, what we make you do is go through a whole new planning process. We don't have a procedure for correction of the errors.
Apart from that, are we also trying to make sure that we don't get errors going forward?
Yes.
There must be some way.
Of course, we work with developers, we work with engineers.
If we have errors, it would seem to me that maybe we reduce those. I'm not saying don't do this, I'm just saying that I hope we're reducing that.
We are. One of the things we're doing is we're creating operational standards within the Community Development Department, and I'm sure Jocelyn could talk all night about that, but we won't. The idea there is that if I'm a developer, I can walk in, I can look at the operational standards, I can see, okay, these are the things I have to do, instead of submitting something with errors in it and then trying to correct it. And so we are doing that. We also don't have any provision right now for condominium plans. The way you do a condominium plan in Middleton is you don't bring it to us. You take it to the Arapahoe County recorder and let them do it.
Or the other counties.
Or the other county, Douglas or Jeffco. We need to have a condominium planning process. And finally, we treat minor and administrative. And a minor subdivision right now in our code is 2 to 10 lots. An administrative subdivision is 1 and 2. We essentially treat those like a major subdivision, which they're not a major subdivision. They don't have any of the issues that major subdivisions have. And I think, Councilman...
Just had a question about the minor was under fewer than 10 lots, but
Yes.
there is no, or is there a size limit or requirement for the lots? Could they be 10 acre lots or 10,
They would have to meet the
lots?
minimum lot size of the zoning. Subdivision doesn't overrule zoning, so they would have to meet the minimum lot size established for that zoning district.
So my follow-up would be if there, say, when we're going with either a subdivision or a re-subdivision, a combination of lots, say there were 2 or 3 very large lots, and to re-subdivide them, it would follow under a minor subdivision, even though it's only 2, even though it's, let's call it 50 acres. Be hyperbolic here. So if you had 2 25-acre lots, if you were to combine them into one big lot, it would be a minor subdivision, even though a 50-acre parcel would seem to be a major thing.
But because you only had one lot, you'd only be allowed to build one residence on that 50 acres. So in theory, could that happen? Yes. More likely what would happen is that a developer would take those 2 25-acre parcels and do a full new subdivision.
Well, it depends on the zoning.
Yes, and it does. It would depend on the zoning. So, what are we looking at? We're looking at improving the code. How? First, by moving provisions. For example, we have a provision in the building code that requires a platted lot for any building permit. You wouldn't know we have it because it's not in the subdivision code. You'd have to know, I need to go look at the building code to find it. We're also providing for correction plats to correct minor technical errors administratively. And finally, to provide for condominium plats to regulate single-family attached development. We need to be doing our planning in the city of Littleton. We don't need to be doing it, having Arapahoe County or Douglas County doing it. Now, what does this proposed ordinance do? And we're going to get into a little bit more detail to answer some of the questions I received from Council Members Elrod and Fay. First, we're recommending that it combine administrative plats and minor subdivisions into a single section using a single planning process. Why? Because they generally have exactly the same issues. Most minor subdivisions, unlike a major subdivision, don't have any right-of-way being dedicated to the city, and many of them don't have any tract dedications for things such as open space and or drainage being dedicated to the city. Because of that, they're not as complex as a major subdivision. And less detail is needed by staff for its review than required for a major subdivision. Right now, we make you come in and do a full preliminary plat. You get through the full preliminary plat process, then you come back in again and do a full final plat process. What should happen is, to make the process more efficiently, you do a full preliminary plat process, and when the community development director says you've met all the requirements, you then simply submit the final plat for council approval.
And that's the administrative approval.
And that would be, it's essentially an administrative process. It's not quasi-judicial. If you were to read our code right now, you'd think a plat was quasi-judicial. It's absolutely clear in the Colorado law, plats are not quasi-judicial. Yes?
So if we decline it, or not approve it, what's the appeal process?
The appeal process would be that, and on these minor subdivisions, if I'm a developer, if there's something that I think the staff has done wrong, and I don't want to go ahead with it, I can appeal that staff decision to the planning commission.
If it's the decision that council made.
If the council makes, then the only thing is you can do a Rule 106 action in district court. There is no appeal beyond the council, and that's because these just like any other administrative action, when the council's done, the only appeal would be to ask the court to find that the council acted beyond its statutory authority.
In here it said, council shall approve it unless it would determine arbitrary or reasonable or capricious. How would council determine that? If staff has approved it, where would that information come from?
Essentially, that is a determination in administrative law, because council's acting administratively. Those three terms are by the fancy legal terms. What they really mean is arbitrary means staff simply didn't follow any of its rules. Staff just simply went out and did something without following the rules. Capricious means that staff acted in excess of its lawful authority. The community development director approved a minor subdivision for 12 lots when the ordinance limits you to 10. And then unreasonable means that based on information before the department, no reasonable person could come to that conclusion. And so those, while we use the legal terms, that's essentially what it means from an ordinary person's standpoint. Now, part of this too is this really fits in with your strategic imperatives. One of the things that you said in your strategic imperatives was that you wanted to improve the comprehensive plan, you wanted to improve internal processes, and how this accomplishes that is we move all the development-related processes into a single code, making it both easier for citizens and applicants to understand the code. So, moving on to the next piece of this, and there's a second part of this. Let me see if I can exit myself out of this to the next piece. Well, I'll let Sam exit me out so I don't screw it up. And then we want to move to the other one.
It's so
In
much
your
nicer
packet,
having this, isn't it?
Yes.
right here. Okay, in your packet, you'll see that we had an attachment that was just an outline of the proposed changes to the subdivision code. And as I mentioned, we propose to move a section out of the building code into subdivisions. Now, the combination of the administrative plats and minor subdivisions into a single process. Right now, we have them in two separate processes. The minor subdivisions are treated like an administrative, like a major subdivision. The administrative plats are extremely restricted. Most divisions of 1 or 2 lots don't qualify for administrative plats because there's a whole series of conditions that you have to meet that really have nothing to do with the fact that they're a minor subdivision. We looked at a whole series of codes, Aurora, Greeley, Fort Collins, Westminster, Lakewood, and what we did is look at how do we take the best from other codes, and this allows for a minor subdivision process from 1 to 10 lots.
Is that number policy, or is that a general definition?
That is, you will find that pretty much across the country. I mean, could you make it more? Yes, but what I would tell you is in my experience as a lawyer, I find that once you get above 10 lots, you really begin to get into more of the major subdivision issues, right-of-way dedications, open space dedications. And 10, it seems to be, looking at other ordinances across the United States, 10 seems to be that rational.
I was thinking perhaps the other way, but where did that number come from? Is it just a policy number or?
It's a policy number that I think you find local governments find that's the right number.
And we have that generally today in our code. That's where the separation is right now between minor and major. And the other piece to recall or remember is also if there's any type of dedication needed, whether it's 2 lots or 20 lots, that moves it into the main. There's certain certain elements that if you don't meet some of those, you still have to be a major subdivision.
So one of the things we also propose to do in this amendment is, right now our code specifies all kinds of administrative things. We specify the number of copies you have to submit in the code. Well, I can tell you over time, we used to require far more written copies than we do now. And we specified you couldn't do them by CAD drawings, you had to do them in hard copy. These are things that should be in the city's administrative standards. They're not policy, they're not legislative, they're just things that over time they change. And we're proposing that those will be handled through the administrative standards and not through the code, because they're just not policy. And then we are also recommending that we provide a new section for correction plats. Delete the section on administrative plats because they've been incorporated into minor subdivisions. And finally, add a new piece on condominium plats. So we are able to address condominium plats. And condominium plats provide some unique issues. If, for example, because they're all attached units, we want to make sure that we look at the water and sewer a bit more closely than we might in even a single-family detached. And so this gives us the ability to do those things. So when we talk about some of the questions I receive from the council about subdivisions is first, what is a subdivision? And it's really a plat. It shows the surveyed dimensions and legal description of a parcel of land. It could also be the reassemblage of parcels or the subdivision or re-subdivision of land in the lots, blocks, tracts, easements, and rights of way. And that is what a subdivision is.
So the language there that I think actually clarifies at least my question, and I think Carol had it too, which was the definition of subdivision where it says it's division of a parcel of land, one or more lots. And I understand what you've defined for us as what subdivision means, that it's not a mathematical answer, but the word the division of is math.
Certainly in the first redraft, my recommendation is we just find a different word.
And I think this reassemblage kind of says that. So I think it's just about providing the clarity, because it's just, you can explain to us right now that subdivision is this, and I think generally speaking that could be an understanding. But division is division.
We'll take the division out.
I think it's an area that needs to be better defined.
The word subdivision is probably the worst word they could use because it is not intuitive to what this is. And that's where it just gets so confusing.
It does, and if I could find a different word, Mayor, I would. The trouble with it is...
it's a common word. I mean, for this purpose, it is...
It's the recognized technical word, but we can further
work on it through a
explain it.
definition. Yep. Yeah.
This sort of gives you a picture of what our current city code today looks like. And
subdivision.
And the current subdivision code, this gives you a picture of it. And now, we talk about these terms like replat. So rather than talking about it, we're now going to go to some pictures. A replat could be taking one lot and making two lots, or taking two lots and making one lot. And generally those have already been platted, so you do a replat, which is a new plat that changes those boundaries.
Yeah, just a new configuration, either up or down.
And it could be 3, 4.
It could be anything up to 10. It could be no more than 10. Now, a minor plat, which is again what we're talking about here, you could take unplatted property and you could have 1 to 10, or you could have unplatted property and just have 1. But that's when we're talking about a minor plat or a minor subdivision, this is what we're talking about.
How much unplatted property is there in Littleton?
Not much. Almost all of our minor subdivisions in Littleton are going to be replats. There's very little, the biggest unsubdivided property we have in the city right now is Henson.
Well, and there's the city center and...
In the city center, yes. But there's not much.
There's some, but yeah. Fewer and fewer over time, obviously.
And there is unplatted?
That's my ask.
They're unplatted. Now, most of what you're gonna see with minor subdivisions will be replats. Another example
Answer, just to clarify.
would be a major subdivision, I expect. I don't see.
But the northern part is platted, so it's not all
Not
unplatted, just
all
to
that.
clarify.
A lot line adjustment is another type of minor subdivision. What happens is, many times, a parcel has lines established decades ago, and the lines don't make any sense anymore. And so the lines are moved. Or a boundary adjustment. What many times subdivisions, people did with subdivisions was, they only platted the lots that they thought they were gonna sell, and then they left a piece unplatted. Well, you really need to address that unplatted piece, and so that could be an adjustment. Or easement vacations. Years ago, I can tell you, developers stuck easements everywhere. I've even seen subdivisions here with easements across lots. It's like, you could never have too many easements. The trouble with it is, we generally don't let you build on top of an easement. The easements may be in the wrong place. The easements may make no sense, and frankly, when it comes to the city, we don't want extra easements. We want all of the stuff in one place because it's easier for us to have a single easement, and so frequently easement vacations are one of the reasons that you deal with a minor subdivision. Or a lot line vacation where you're just going to remove the lot line and create a single lot. Or again, as I mentioned, lot line adjustments. Sometimes the lot lines just need to be moved. And again, this is another example. These all came from a prior planning commission presentation that was done a couple of years ago. And these were all examples of those types of things.
What did we do? So the property on Prince Street, I think it was 2 lots that we put into one, and there was something with an easement there too. The one that now is like a horseshoe-shaped development, right across from. Right here, yeah, right here.
The one like last month?
Next to the painted ladies.
It was just a replat.
That was a replat?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
That they're putting the slot houses in?
That's where the slot home is, where we.
Yeah, that was a replat. Oh, no, wait, that was a subdivision.
I'm asking, what did we do there?
I'll have to follow up and get back
Well,
to you.
I don't remember either.
I don't know that we've
like a
done
month ago.
anything there.
No, it was a
No, we
subdivision.
did still.
We combined 2 lots,
We
maybe.
combined 2 lots, and then I think there was something with an easement too.
I'll follow up with you. to let you
Follow
know.
up with that.
Yeah.
So what we're really asking the council tonight is, we'll certainly make the changes on removing the mathematical terms, but what our recommendation is, we would like to come to you with, on first read, with this change. This, and again, Jocelyn can certainly add on to this, this is a major piece in making our development process more effective and efficient for citizens, more effective for developers, just making a better process. And I think Mayor, I think Councilmember Hardin.
I agree, this is much better than where it is now, and I think we can better understand it. Well, I want to come back to Kyle's scenario of combining lots.
Yes.
And so, I would like for us, as we prepare for, taking this to a final approval, to really put out some real case scenarios that could happen out there to help us understand what the impact of this could be. And for example, if we take 10 houses in downtown Littleton and they all become one lot, one subdivision, that can completely change the character of those 10 little houses. So that, I just want to understand what could could happen under these scenarios.
And we can certainly do that. In fact, what I'll do is I'd like to work with Jocelyn and just sort of put together some examples, real life examples. What I think you will see in Littleton is where we're seeing lot combinations is where we have old plats. The lots simply don't make economic sense in today's market. And so parcels are being combined because the plats may be 50 years old. And I can tell you 50 years ago, the standard plat was, I need to be 200 feet deep and 60 feet wide. Those don't make any sense.
So, and I
But
think
it's just to recognize, but it's a function of the zoning, right? Like the zoning is driving a lot of the.
I know, so that's why I'm asking.
Piece. That's what
I want to
just
see
make
it
sure
come
that's
together.
clear.
I want to see it come together because when you combine lots, you can build something bigger, which can change the character of a neighborhood. And, if we don't want to use downtown as an example, if we want to use some of the acreage property, if you were to put, 3 properties together, then you could build a super McMansion.
Well, it depends on the zoning, right? Like that's the piece to your point. We need to help you clarify. Because not all residential zone districts allow you to do multifamily. So it doesn't, you know what I mean? So the zoning really drives some of where people are taking the subdivisions in order to maximize their zoning.
And frankly, the reason that the PDO came to you before this did was we needed to address the PDO first, because the PDO, actually, the zoning allowed you to do things that if you put this in place before you did the PDO, you could have had some unintended results. So we brought the PDO to you first to make sure that you couldn't use that as a way of getting around all the minimum performance standards in the zoning district, and then use the subdivision to implement that.
And in the major subdivision, there was a factor in there about, it can't be more, there was a limit to the size of the subdivision, but we're not putting that here, correct? Am I remembering that correctly? And that is something else that Kyle pointed out. Is there a limit of how big that can be? And I think in major subdivision, there was some language on that. I don't remember.
I'm not aware of any limit in size to the major subdivision. The thing is that because of the levels of engineering and infrastructure planning that's done for a major subdivision, realistically in this city, you are only going to see them in an ENSA type parcel. Because there's just so much engineering and infrastructure planning, and we require dedications. There's going to be right-of-way dedications, and those types of things make sense in a major subdivision. In a minor subdivision, take for example right here, if we go across the street to Prince Street, take a couple of the houses at Prince and Berry South, and say you were to combine those 2 lots. We already have all the dedications. We're not going to take any more right-of-way for Prince. We're not going to take any more right-of-way for Berry. We have all the dedications. What we are going to want to do is look at how that gets laid out and making sure that that's laid out in a way that's compatible with adjacent property and also compatible with the zoning. And with that concludes our presentation. And again, based on the council direction, if council finds this acceptable, we would proceed to first read and bring this to you for first reading.
Take it to planning commission.
And also, this has to go to planning commission because it is part of the zoning code.
Does it go to, it goes to planning before it
It will
comes
come
to
to
us?
planning before it comes to you.
Okay, so, yeah, Mark was raising an issue where what Karina's asking for and how that may overlap with zoning and making sure that we're able to give the clarity that we need for this, but not confuse things by mixing the zoning stuff into it. So if there's a way that you guys can execute that so that there's a defined delineation for us, because you know where we'll go.
I think
we'll go right there.
We can do that. Well, I think I would recommend in this that we simply add a provision that indicates in the subdivision code that any minor subdivision must be in full conformance with the zoning and the performance standards in that zoning district.
I'm not necessarily asking for that, it's more of like from a presentation perspective.
Yep, I hear both.
Understand, we can deal with that, and if the council, is this consensus, Mayor, from the council, we'd like to go ahead to the planning commission and come back to council on first read.
Council?
Yep.
I do disagree though with what Karina said. I see no harm in putting in there what you just said.
We can address that.
Yep.
It's a little redundant,
Yep.
but it's
Or put in writing.
More detail.
We'll add that detail, and council, mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have, that is our agenda. There is manager or attorney reports. Anything that you have?
I had just a couple of things, Mayor, just briefly. You'll see it on the agenda for next week. Under general business, a resolution for the council to consider here to provide staff some, I think, and the public, quite honestly, some real clarity about the intent of the ordinance that was passed here in April, right after the contract here with South Metro. And specifically what we're talking about here is to make sure that in the resolution that you're providing staff clear direction about the intent of lowering the mill levy in the future budget of 2019, and also then to allocate the savings that we would have from the operating piece of the fire in 2020. Just so all this is real clear.
This is
Just
what
more redundant.
we asked you to do last week? Is that what this is?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So I'm just giving you kind of a heads up. That's our intent, is to provide that resolution next week on general business.
Yes.
So it is a new addition, but to your tentative calendar.
Okay. I think general business is better than consent.
I think it's worth some time kind of discussing this publicly.
Okay.
Okay? So that's one issue. I think Steve may want to touch on the concept of the blue book, perhaps for some of these charter changes. And then I have one last issue after Steve.
Mayor, council, the question I wanted to raise with you very briefly tonight is, under Colorado law, we do not have to do a blue book for local items except table items. But we do have the option. And the question I want to raise with the council would be whether we should consider doing a blue book as a way of informing our citizens about the charter changes. Now, by law, we would have to mail that to every registered voter in the city. The clerk and I have worked through, and we estimate the cost of doing a blue book for those 5 charter changes would be not more than $25,000. But this is really a case of, if you say you'd like us to look at that, we would then incorporate that in our election planning. If you say no, then we won't. But I would like some direction from the council informally now, and then we can obviously come back with formal direction, but whether we should do that, because time is of the essence at this point.
Carol, pros and cons?
The pros of doing a blue book is citizens have more information. One of those comes to every single registered voter, and people can submit arguments, and there's a description of the item. Cons, we're going to spend $25,000. So the real question is the value of that.
Karina? And then Pat.
Can you, so I asked this question because I was just trying to understand how are we going to be able to communicate things that are going to be on the ballot. And I was under the assumption you get one blue book, because I feel like in the past I've gotten one blue book and probably didn't notice what was on there, what was not on there. So can you combine different, or is it, would we have one for Littleton, one for South Metro, potentially one for something else, etc.?
The South Metro's election is not a table election, it's an annexation election, so that won't have a blue book. But assuming the school district does a bond issue, you'll have a school district blue book, you would have a state blue book because the state is required to do one. If the county was to do a tax adjustment or a bond issue, any of the counties, they would have a blue book, and then we would have our blue book. So conceivably,
Can you combine Littleton Public Schools, the county, and the city of Littleton as
if
one?
the three governmental entities agree to do that. Now, in an ideal world, that would be, I would tell you, in an ideal world, that would be.
But that's the only one that makes sense, because to have four blue books sitting on it's just too much.
In Colorado, you can't do that. Now, if we were in Arizona, we actually do it that way, but here in the
So
state.
you actually are prohibited from doing that?
Yeah, in Colorado, the law doesn't provide for that unless you do an intergovernmental agreement. So conceivably, you could have four blue books.
What's your deadline?
Our deadline, really, we would need to, we have the ballot IGAs before you next meeting. We need to know by next meeting because we have to basically put it together, have it printed, and have the notices and everything done.
Pat and then Kyle.
I mean, can't we use technology here? Can't we post this on our site?
Absolutely. We're going to have a whole election tab on our webpage. We're going to be posting all kinds of information on our webpage.
I think that's how we get it out there.
But we have to be very careful about what we put on our webpage because that, you can get into electioneering.
Yes.
The blue book, I mean.
Is objective.
Yeah, it can be
Sorry,
more of a.
Page or something.
Because
the blue book allows arguments and things to be submitted in a descriptive title. This is really totally a policy question. Wendy and I would do whatever you direct. It's just, this is a decision that comes from you.
I'm supportive of doing it. I think we should do as much as we possibly can to get the information out there to everyone. You know, I wish we could do it all on social media on our website.
We can, we just have to be careful.
Right, so I guess the question is, the intent is, how do we get information out there?
Right.
What is the plan right now for that if there's no blue book?
So, we're open to recommendations of how do we get information out to our...
Well, if I may, let me just, sorry, if I may. Let me weigh in a bit.
Just the management side of this too.
Mother may I, he says.
We have a communication plan here for getting the information out. To me, that's not the issue. I think we have that well in hand. To me, this is going above and beyond that. The Blue Book is a very standard practice for lots of ballot issues. Now, again, as Steve has touched on, it's just simply not required. So the question really is, do you want to spend the extra money to go beyond that communication plan and provide a very specific piece of documentation called the Blue Book? That's really the question.
And then with the Blue Book, are you required to allow other people to contribute?
Yeah, there can be one opposing, a pro and a con. Kyle, did you have a question?
Does staff feel comfortable without doing the Blue Book? I mean, my point is do as much as we possibly can to reach as many people, but if staff feels communication plan that you have identified is enough to inform as many voters as possible.
I believe strongly, quite honestly, that our plan is pretty robust. And so I think that we'll be very effective at getting the information out.
How soon?
Well, we've started that. We got an actual plan with dates and kind of very specific tasks. So, I think we don't wait. We do have a Gantt chart. But we don't necessarily put a lot of that information out until we get closer to the election because, most people don't read anything until, shortly before. So it is timed. It ramps up over time. The strategy is pretty deep here. It's not just written information. It's also the opportunity for us as staff to make presentations to different kinds of groups. And we've already been asked by groups for us to make presentations. So that there's an overarching communication plan at all sorts of different levels. So I am very confident that we're going to get the word out.
Can I ask again, or hear your answer again? If we wanted to have one blue book that combined the Arapahoe County and Littleton Public Schools, we would first have to get an intergovernmental agreement with those two. And are they going to be required to put a blue book out, given what they're,
Littleton Public Schools, based on what they're proposing to do, assuming they go ahead and do that, yeah, they would have to, yes, they would have to do a blue book, because it's a bond issue.
Arapahoe County,
Arapahoe County, if they would, or Jeffco or Douglas, any of those counties, if they were to do a bond issue this year, they would have to do a blue book. If they don't,
I don't think Arapahoe County is doing one this year.
so is it worth the effort to work with Littleton Public Schools, knowing that they're already gonna put one out there?
Well, logistically, they would have to put 2 out there then.
Why?
Because Littleton Public Schools expands beyond Littleton. So they're not going to send our charter questions to Centennial.
and that does create some, this state, because of the way it's structured, it does create some issues. Could it be done? Yes, if we were gonna do it ideally, what would have been nice would have been to start that process about 6
Yeah,
months
we
ago.
don't have time. If you
That's
need to
the
know
problem.
next week, there would not be time for that.
I feel comfortable with what staff is doing, and I feel that's sufficient.
I still like the idea of doing a blue book, but I'm comfortable without, but that would be my first choice.
Way to play the middle.
With or without? With, first choice?
With the blue book, yeah.
Okay. Peggy?
I like it. I think if schools are putting one out, people get that and something on the ballot, and we don't have something, I think it looks like to some
Kinda nice
people that we're not being upfront.
So you are, yes. Marina?
My concern then is, I think that's a good point, Peggy. Then my concern is, I have books, I have lots of, it just seems so disjointed and, but it is necessary and it's a form of information. I think I'm going to say, we do it.
Yes.
Hi.
I have just one quick piece here.
Three giant steps.
So, Mark, before you jump in the next, so does that change your plan as far as what you guys are gonna do? So you're still
Not
gonna
at all.
stick with your outreach
Correct.
program and your,
Yeah, correct.
Is there anywhere you can save money now?
that's my biggest thing was the money, you know?
Maybe I could save some money in open space.
Not funny.
I mean,
Cancel that playground.
All right, I'm sorry.
recommending it, or we're just asking? Was there a recommendation?
I personally recommend it.
Okay.
I recommend we take the step. Yeah. All right, so, periodically, I did tell the council I would come back and tell you just kind of some updates about the unification here between South Metro and our Littleton Fire. And so I do have kind of a quick update here, and I'd say it's pretty substantial. They've been working through kind of the staffing of the different stations here, and so just this week, they put together an organization plan for their management, which is a big step. And they've also made some decisions here about how they're going to staff some of the stations, and of course, the ones that are within the city are the most important, I suppose, to us. And so they have decided to move ahead with a 4-person staffing for stations 11, 12, 13, 18, and 19. Quite honestly, that's at a level we don't have today. And
Instead of 4-person staffing?
4-person staffing
Or on a truck.
on a truck, excuse me.
Oh, gotcha.
On a truck. So when I say staffing, it's per truck.
Gotcha.
So
We've always done 3.
We've done 3. And I think that our master plan kind of touched on that long term as a goal for us. So South Metro is making that commitment here now, here for the first of the year. And I would estimate that investment alone is well over $1 million just in the total amount of staffing necessary to go to 4 per truck for those stations. So, quite honestly, I think that is pretty substantial. They've also kind of allocated the resources here for the battalion chiefs. This is the upper command, and there'll be a total of 6, and it looks like 2 of them will be within our stations. So I think that's a pretty substantial commitment there for kind of the management of that. They've made some allocation for brush trucks and some of their dive teams and stuff. Not a lot of change there, but they've basically kept the resources that we've had here locally. And it looks like, too, their medical units and paramedics, they have a little different kind of approach to that, but it looks like they're kind of stepping up and in at least meeting the standard that we've had here for kind of paramedics and medics. So I think that's, honestly, I'm pretty pleased with kind of where they've landed here on the staffing. So that's kind of my update on that. So,
I just have one quick thing I emailed to you guys. I don't know if you all had a chance to read it. It was also handed out. It's regarding the homelessness update with Metro mayors. There's a Metro Denver Homeless Initiative that created a flex fund, and you can see on the handout that you got, Littleton, for whatever reason, has never contributed to it. This was started last year, and I don't know why we didn't. I don't recall it being brought to the council by the mayor. So this was something that came out again, that they're asking for commitments for the 2019 budget. And you can kind of read what the fund is used for. It's been successful in getting, I think they've been able to help move six homeless people into housing. This is just basically helping people with things like a first deposit and things like that can keep people from getting a house if they've got to put down a $1,500 rent deposit and you don't quite have it. You can pay the rent, but you can't make the deposit. So that is an ask. And the ask actually is to have Mark bring that back as an inclusion in the budget for 2019. And I would just say, recommended amount based on what the numbers look like on here would be like $1,000. It seems like there's a lot of the cities that are doing the $1,000. It seems like the fund is operating, but it is not broke. So that would be just the ask, and if you guys are okay with Mark bringing back into budget, we can bless that.
I think of $25,000, where that can come from real quick. That's where I'd rather spend my money. Or not my money, city's money.
City's money.
I'm good.
Okay, anything else? No? We're adjourned. Thank you. Congratulations.